Okay, that should do it. That should be recording now. Yes. So, welcome once again to this program of Bioethics, Master of Science in Bioethics. And this particular class or first lecture course on fundamental principles in Catholic bioethics. Okay. I always like to begin my classes with a little prayer. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Blessed Trinity, we love you, we adore you, and we thank you for your many blessings, for the gift of life, and for having us here today. I ask that you send your Holy Spirit to illumine our hearts and minds with regards to these issues of bioethics that surround us today, Lord, in our contemporary society, as complex as they may be. With your light, we can see through the truth and be able to promote that truth among those who surround us, so that we may be able to maintain and promote the dignity and the sanctity of human life, and also respect for the environment that is a reflection of your creation. And we ask this in the name of Christ our Lord. Amen. Okay, so let's do a few introductions then. I'll get the ball rolling. I am a Catholic priest in the Archdiocese of Miami for over 32 years now. I think I'm going to just did 33 from 1985 anyway, so that's 32, yes. And aside from that, I had studied biology before going into the priesthood. First went to Miami-Dade when it was a junior college, right, in 1970, the South Campus, which is now the Kendall Campus. And after a year and a half there, went to FIU when it started in 72. It was a single building back then. I don't know if you've been by FIU lately, but it's a whole city now. And back then, Primera Casa, PC, which I think it's called now the Perry Center or something like that, the central building. That was a whole university. I used to live in Sweetwater and ride my bicycle across the wooden bridge into campus. And it was a field, and then there was the airstrip, because I used to be in Old Airport. That was the old Miami Airport, which now moved south of Lourdes Parish, or Lady of Lourdes. And now it's the new Miami Airport. Well, that used to be on 8th Street there. And you know the police tower on campus, the campus security, that used to be the airport tower. It was about 4 stories high for commuter planes. It was a commuter airport. Anyway, that was in the 70s, graduated with biology at FIU. Wasn't even thinking about the priesthood back then. I was doing marine biology. And so I started teaching at St. Brennan High. And guess what's next to St. Brennan High? The seminary. Okay, so after a couple of years of teaching, I started thinking about the vocation, and the long and the short is I went into the seminary. And then when I entered the seminary, I said, well, from now on, biology will be a hobby, because what does a priest do with biology, right? Then the bioethical issues started coming up. Stem cell research, human cloning, remember Dolly, the first clone mammal? And I thought, well, biologically, a mammal is a mammal. And so cloning, the technique for cloning a sheep is the same technique for cloning a human, all right, biologically speaking. But ethically speaking, there may be a difference between cloning a sheep or cloning a human. And so the long and the short is that I was sent for further studies twice. First, I was sent to Rome for a doctorate in moral theology with the Jesuits, and I survived that. And then I taught at the seminary for a while. And then in the year 2000, more or less, or 2001, the bioethical issues kept getting more and more complicated because of technology that is driving this field, right? And so I realized that my little bachelor's in biology from the 1970s at FIU was becoming inadequate. And so I needed to update on the scientific side. I already had the moral theology side with a terminal degree, but I needed something on the scientific side. So I was sent again for further studies, and this time I went to Purdue and got a doctorate in genetics, totally on the scientific. So now I am competent in those two fields, and I just say this in all humility because it's also important, particularly with these issues, who you talk to, and if they don't have the competence, it's going to be an opinion. And that opinion may or may not hit the target, okay? So in these areas of bioethics where you see it's thoroughly interdisciplinary, it has a scientific side, but it also has the ethical, theological, or philosophical analysis that needs to be done to determine whether it should be done or not. We can do it, but should we do it, right? Two different questions. Okay, so that's as far as my professional background. I've been teaching here for about 8 years now, and I teach biology, bioethics. In fact, I started an institute for bioethics, and this is one of the outputs of that institute is this new master's, and that's why it's a Master of Science, okay? Some of you have a scientific background, others don't, but don't be scared, either with the theology or the science, because we'll walk step by step with this whole program. Okay, enough said about myself. If you have questions or comments, you're free to make them anytime. Why don't we go around now, and you can tell each one of us about yourselves, okay?
I'm Melissa Walker. I'm originally from Philadelphia. I moved down to Miami about 6 years ago, and I was at Riviera Preparatory School. I recently joined St. Brennan High School, and I teach chemistry there.
Chemistry. Welcome. So you pronounce your name Elisa, not Elisa?
Yeah, Elisa.
Elisa.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
My name is Adriana. I have a bachelor's in finance. I'm also a pianist, and I'm from Cuba. I've been living here for 10 years.
Welcome, Adriana.
My name is Henry. I have a bachelor's in organizational psychology. Married to this beautiful lady. We go to St. Raymond Parish.
Thanks. Welcome, Henry.
My name is Jorge. I'm also from Cuba, but I arrived to the States when I was 7 years old. That was about 18 years ago. And so I have a Bachelor in Business Administration, which I received from St. Thomas, and a Bachelor of Philosophy, which I received from seminary. I was also a seminarian. So now at this point, I'm working for the Archdiocese and continuing my discernment.
Welcome, Jorge.
Hi, I'm Kayla Bell. I'm originally from Maine and moved here about 8 years ago. And I am working, I got my bachelor's at University of Maine in secondary education. I'm working at Christopher Columbus High School as a biology, physical science, astronomy teacher.
Welcome to the tropics.
Let's say the black sheep in the group. My name is Louis Pansana. Was ordained 17 years ago as a permanent deacon in the Archdiocese of Miami. I currently teach religion at Immaculate. Father Cioffi has kindly invited me to come and see and discern and what I would like to do this and that. I have no background in science. But here I am.
Excellent. Welcome, Deacon. If you stick with the program, you will get a background in science, believe me. So you notice how diverse and how rich the group is, right? It's amazing. Not really, because bioethics really appeals to so many different areas of life. It appeals to the sciences, of course, either in teaching or in research. It also appeals to the social sciences because these are social issues, right? For example, again, in human cloning or 3-parent embryos like the UK is doing, they use public money, right? And the major research funding agency, the two major ones in the US, NSF and NIH, are using our money to the tunes of billions of dollars. So they are social issues also. They have an economic impact, they have political impact. And certainly on the philosophical and the theological side, it's a contribution, it's a richness. I mentioned this is a second cohort. The first cohort is about to graduate now in December. They're down to their last 2 courses. And there are 2 students in that group. 2 of them are MDs. There's a nurse. They're housewives. They're the wife of a deacon. There's a permanent deacon who comes from St. Augustine, Florida, not St. Augustine Parish, okay?
Wow.
But he doesn't come to every class. Most of the time he links in through the Zoom thing. But every now and then he comes from there because he's very intent. In fact, he's putting together now a whole program for Bishop Esteves in the Diocese of St. Augustine to transmit this down into the Catholic schools of the diocese and religious ed and CCD and all the various programs at the diocesan level. So this is really the exciting thing about bioethics. If we get it right, then we can share it with others because it clarifies a lot of doubts and a lot of issues that people are normally not clear on. All right? All right, so questions or comments? Anything? No? Let's go through a few more technicalities and then we'll take a break, and in the second half we'll get into some subject matter as such. All right? Okay. Again, stop me at any time if there are comments or doubts or anything like that. So let's, there are 2 courses that will go through this fall from now until mid-December. All right, I'll get more specific about the actual dates in a minute. But I want to say this. We have regular semesters that are 16 weeks long, and then we have these mini-semesters that are 9 weeks each, right? So already there's a discrepancy because 9 plus 9 is 18, not 16. So what's going on? Well, what's going on is that we actually have an extra week on those mini-semesters, and I'm using that to our advantage in this sense, that we don't need the whole 18 weeks of class to meet, all right? We actually have 9 modules that we'll cover in this course. So bottom line is we need 9 times to meet like this, either live or remotely, and the rest will be reading on the material or reflecting on the textbook that you have, which by the way is this one. I'll talk more about Meyer and the modern synthesis in biology that happened at the beginning of last century. Okay, and while I'm on the textbook, this is a loaner, so you can use it during the semester, and I need it back at the end for the next cohort. But if you want to buy the book, I bought these online very cheaply because actually ironically, the edition is out of print now. And the man just died. He lived about 100 years, all right? So he spanned the whole 20th century from I think 1904 to 2005, something like this. He wrote this in 2001 when he was 90-something. A brilliant mind. He was part of what we call the modern synthesis in biology. So I consider this a classic. And some of these copies I picked up for 99 cents. So it costs more to ship it than the actual book, all right? But anyway, if you later want to add it to your own library of books, go online. I'm sure you can find it cheaply. Okay. So back to the 2 courses, right? This is the Bio 513, and then the other course is 514. You should be registering for both of those, even though technically this one is offered in the first 9 weeks and the other one is offered in the second 9 weeks. All right, this is how we're going to work it out. This one is going to go for the full semester, all right? Because we need 9 times, but a few times I have to be away. A few Saturdays I have to be away of commitments that I have. So we typically go like 2 or maybe 3 Saturdays in a row, and then have to be absent 1 or 2 Saturdays and so forth. But we'll work it out. The other one basically will be online because the other one is on responsible research and professional conduct, right? And that one has 2 requirements. One is downloading a book from the National Academy of Sciences. It's called Ambiente Scientist. getting a little ahead of myself because I also gave you a handout on it. And doing little summaries of the mini chapters of that book that you can download for free online. And the other one is completing 3 modules on a national ethics center that is housed at the University of Illinois. I'll get to that in a minute as soon as I go through this first syllabus, all right? But just to know in anticipation that the other course, the 514, is going to be mostly on your own. But we synergize because since we're going to be meeting live, if you have any questions or comments about the other material, we can talk about it and we can address it when we meet for this one, which requires more direct contact because I'm going to give you some knowledge and explain some things that not everyone's familiar with, like the forces driving evolution and things like that. All right? Okay. Nicolas, you have a question?
Yes, I was wondering, so this is the guideline of the course on page 6 here?
Exactly, that's page 6. I'm still on page 1, but I'll get to page 6 in a few minutes. Yeah, so that's the bottom line, that's it there. Okay, that's the clincher. Okay, so as you can see, the first page is just informative. I always put my cell phone number because if ever you have a question, a doubt, or anything, either call me. If I cannot answer, leave me a message. I'll call you back or text me. And if you're not showing up or something, I'll text you. And that way we keep in touch, just like the techies today. You know, the kids, they're sitting at the same table and everybody's silent, but they're all texting each other and they're having a textual conversation, a virtual textual conversation, and they're all mute. Okay. All right. Forward. Yes, on the email, we're supposed to be using, for any kind of communication that has to do with the course or with the program, we're supposed to be using our STU email. All right. So I know that you've given me your personal email here, and that's fine, kind of as a backup. But we're supposed to be communicating. Certainly, when you send me the homework things, little summaries, and that, use your STU email. All right, and you get that when you register. This may be the classroom here is actually 105 until I get that other computer working better. All right. Emergency contact, this is just standard. We have to print this on every syllabus, but I want to concentrate on 2 main parts. First, this page 2 here, which goes to the substance of the course. And then page 6, as Deacon Luis pointed out, that's the syllabus. I'm sorry, that's the calendar. All right. The textbook is this one, which I talked about already. And then other sources that I'll give you as we go along, okay? The description of the course itself. This course critically analyzes the fundamental Catholic principles and examines empirically biological principles necessary for the proper determination of what may be done out of what can be done in empirical science, medicine, and technology today. So what I say is that the distinction between can and may is not just a grammatical distinction, okay? It can be a life or death distinction because we can do many things in the lab today with research and with technology. And you understand that technology is driving this field very strongly, all right? For example, there's a problem in the Middle East right now. There has been a problem in the Middle East for centuries, actually millennia. We can take care of that problem, right, by dropping a few nuclear bombs strategically. And we can do that because the stealth bombers are flying overhead as we speak, loaded, and they don't even land to refuel. They refuel on the air. Okay? So we can do it technologically. But should we do it? May we do it? I hope that we agree. Okay, then I ask questions. How many of you think that we may, I hope I don't put anyone in evidence. How many of you think that we should drop nuclear bombs in the Middle East? That we may do it? Anybody yes? No?
No.
No,
We shouldn't do it.
not sure,
Not sure.
not sure, and the rest don't care. That's what I say to my students. Yes, no, not sure, don't care. The ones who don't answer, right? Okay, well, I think that really we can agree that we should not do that. We should know that, because what is that going to say? Yeah, we may solve one problem, but it was going to raise a bigger problem, right? We're going to kill millions of innocent people, and we're going to contaminate at least that region of the world for several decades, if not centuries, with radioactivity. All right, so those are two big reasons why we should not do that. We got to find alternative ways. But we can do it. We can do it. In fact, the whole issue of deterrence is predicated on the fact that we can. Nuclear deterrence is based on nuclear power, nuclear capabilities. And there's another issue in North Korea right now, right? Which is extremely delicate. So you see, we have the capacity to do it. We can do it. Should we push that button? That's a different story. And that's why in bioethics, what we look at is the may we, should we. To say yea or nay, we have to have the competency, both at the scientific side and in the theological/philosophical side. Okay? So what's really what this course is about, or the program as a whole. This particular course, what I'm interested in is, I propose for you to develop what I'm calling a Judeo-Christian anthropology. What's an anthropology? Another word of an anthropology is a vision of the human person. Who are we? Who are we? Yeah. From a spiritual or religious perspective, it's part of the Judeo-Christian tradition that we are the image of God. That's from the book of Genesis, right? And then spread out through the other 72 books of the Bible, one way or another. But what does that mean? That we are God's image, and is that given to us by society, or is it something intrinsic? Or is it our parents who give us that dignity, or a committee? Ooh, right? The way we answer that question will have implication on social issues, particularly at the beginning of life and at the end of life, of human life. But then we realize that we don't live in a vacuum, that we're actually grounded on a planet that has other life around. So that passage from the Bible, also from the book of Genesis, be fertile and multiply and subdue the earth, doesn't mean rape the earth and destroy it, because even selfishly, we would destroy ourselves in the process, right? It means stewardship. It's caring for creation. And we're becoming more painfully aware of that with all of the environmental issues and global warming and climate change and all that stuff. Which, by the way, a couple of years ago, the Institute for Bioethics, together with some colleagues, we had our first international conference on climate, nature, and society here at St. Thomas. It was 2 days, 6 talks. On Thursday were the 3 scientific talks of the evidence for climate change or global warming. And then on Friday, the 3 talks were on social and spiritual impact of that, including, we had as one of the keynote speakers, the cardinal who wrote the encyclical for Pope Francis on the environment, Laudato Si. All right, we'll cover that in the environmental course next summer. But that was the first conference that we had here at St. Thomas. It was a great success. And we have it all online, recorded. So I'll send you the link, and at your leisure, you can listen to the talks and the panel discussions and all that. We're now preparing, again with some other colleagues, for a second international conference on climate, nature, and society, because this issue is not going to go away, right? And we need to find solutions that are adequate. Okay. Any comment, or people are good with the overall vision of the course of developing an anthropology that is respectful of science and faith, all right, of both aspects, because we cannot deny the fossil record, what I say. That bone is there whether I believe it or not. And it belonged to an ancestor, a species who's no longer alive, no longer here. but was alive at some point, okay? And so it behooves us to acknowledge evolution and the evolutionary process, because evolution explains how one species becomes another species. It still doesn't tell us why, or what's the purpose, or what's our original origin and an ultimate end. Those are more theological questions. And so we have to be respectful also of religion and spirituality, and there's a complementarity that can be very elegant between science and faith. And again, I say with all due respect, the Catholic Church today is in a privileged position to enter and to continue dialogue with the good aspect of science, because good science brings out the truth. It's evidence-based. It's based on empirical data, But religion also has a contribution to make, to keep science honest also, so that it doesn't become ideological or political, because then we have ideology trumping reality. Okay. So that's why I love this field, really. It's given me an opportunity to merge different aspects of study and reflection, and we can come up with an anthropology that is very rich and respectful of all humanity and the environment in which we live, okay? So specifically, and you as teachers know, you need outcomes and you need assessment of the outcomes and all that jazz, right? Okay, it's all about the culture of assessment. All right, so here are the three learning outcomes of the course. First, to examine and to go deeply into these biological principles that apply to bioethics, all right? And also the look at the fundamental teachings of the Catholic Church and any other tradition really that has something to contribute toward bioethics. And then third, to generate a personal anthropology. Okay, this is what I invite you to do for this course, is to develop a personal anthropology that is rich, that is deep, that is open to mystery, and at the same time has a substance to it. That is grounded in concrete experience of what nature presents us. So that said, then we have these 9 modules that I spoke about. All right. I'm not going to go through them in detail right now, but basically it's looking more or less the first half of the course on the scientific evidence for evolution and getting into the process of evolution itself, because there is this perceived mutual exclusivity that if I am a scientist and I believe, or believe is not the right word because evolution occurs whether we believe it or not, right? But I value or buy into the process of evolution as a scientist, then I cannot be a religious person. Whereas if I practice a faith and I'm a religious person, then I have to buy creationism, God the creator of everything that is, as it is, and I have to discard evolutionary process. There's that apparent contradiction out there, and it's in the minds of many people, and yet they're both improper visions of either science or faith, or science and religion. Okay, and I hope that this course will help you understand why those are improper ways, and really the more rich way to look at it is a complementarity between science and religion, or nature and faith. All right. Okay, so more or less the first half of the course will be dedicated more to the scientific evidence for the process of evolution. And then the second half, more on the theological side, examining especially the biblical text of Genesis, and then going from there into other church documents that also make that link with evolutionary process, philosophically and theologically. So that's the overall. Then you can read those modules in more detail, but basically that is the outline of the course, how we're going to be moving. So the first half is going to be more scientific, the second half is going to be more theological. No? People are good? Keep going? All right. Those handouts are for you. You can write all over them or do whatever you want with them. You also have some extra blank pages there if you want to write some more stuff. Feel free. That binder is for you. My gift to you to get you started. Then for the following courses, you get your own. Okay. You can probably fit the 2 courses in each one of these. So you, at the end of the program, maybe 4 of these binders will have the whole program, all 8 courses. All right. It's up to you. The grading, okay, blah, blah, blah. This is graduate school. So the minimum grade for graduate school, this is actually a C as opposed to a D, all right? This is an adapted undergraduate syllabus. But the minimum grade for graduate school is a C. I'm sure you're all going to do fine. Don't worry about it. Don't sweat it. I gave you here the percentage equivalent for each grade level, for each letter grade. And this is on a 4-point average. This is the official grading scale of the university. It's pretty standardized, and this is what I go with. All right. Okay, while I'm on the grade, the basic issue is, this is with regards to attendance, where required, we professors are required to take attendance at every class, all right? But this gives me an opportunity to reiterate the 3 modes of participating in each lecture. The first mode, of course, is like this, live. Show up, I'll start at 9:15, whoever is here, and I'll end typically by 12:45, all right? So you can budget your time. The second mode is to participate live, in other words, in this same session, but remotely. In other words, if you were to link in remotely, you will appear as another one of these little tiles, all right, wherever you are. And you can either maximize it or minimize it. It's up to you. And then you will have, what you do in your computer is you need internet access, of course, wherever you're going to be, all right? And it will lock into the desktop, the screen. So you're seeing remotely the same that we're seeing, all right? And then we get a little tile like that. Again, you can minimize it if you want. And also make sure that you have a microphone in your computer or an attachment, whatever, so that if you have a question or comment, we can hear you. All right, and you'll hear us the same way. So that's the second mode of participating remotely. And the third mode is simply you're not available on Saturday for whatever reason. Again, it's graduate school, so you decide. At the end of the lecture, I make a YouTube out of this thing and send you the link, and there it is. So you have to then watch it at your own convenience, okay? Then you want to watch it before Wednesday midnight, because by Wednesday midnight, the little summary is due. I'll talk a little bit more about the summary, but basically that's going to be the bulk of the grade is going to come from this little summaries that I ask on a weekly basis. And that is due by Wednesday midnight. If for some reason in a particular week you need more time, extra time, send me an email and I'll let you know. But typically if you need more time for a valid reason, I'll give you more time, Thursday, Friday. Just give me some time so that I can grade it and give it back to you hopefully by the next Saturday of the meet. All right? Okay. So those 3 modes of attendance are fine. Oh, okay, so if you're going to be out on a Saturday and you know it beforehand, send me an email so that I can put under the roster excuse for that day. Otherwise, I have to put that absent. And if it was an emergency, then send me an email afterwards and I'll change it from absence to excuse, but it's easier to do it from the beginning, all right? What else here? All of this is pretty academic policy. Be honest, please. All right. Let me talk a little bit more about the summary at this point. I need to go to the other, let me see where I have it. It's on the back side. Since I'm on that, let me talk about that. It's on the back side of the other one page, the 514, right? It's after this syllabus. Keep going on your, it's on the back side of that 514 page. I'm looking for, where is it? There we go. I need to get into the 514 course to pull up that same little sheet. Okay. So the formatting, if you can keep it this way, it's just easier for me to correct and to give comments and so forth. First of all, use the narrow margins. I don't know if you're going to be using Word or some other program, but basically look for the narrow margins, okay? Which is typically half of the, so it's like half an inch instead of 1 inch. It just gives you more writing space. I certainly don't need the blue lines on it, okay? I just did that for guidance. I don't need the blue lines, but to show that it's a narrow margin, all right? And then on the first line in caps, if you don't mind, just give me your name, last name is fine, then which one is it? Is it the homework for this course or the 514, right? And then the specific title of that lecture, and then the date. Either the date of the lecture or the day you turn it in, whatever, but the date in that week so that we can ground it to that week. Okay? That's the first line there. And then the actual substance of the summary goes in here. Let me minimize this a little bit so you can see most of the page. All right? So the substance of your summary will go within the margin area. And here's an example. I don't even need full sentences or paragraphs. It can be an outline form. I'm looking for evidence that you understood that particular lecture, okay? And so it's a summary. It's a summary. Okay? It doesn't have to be long. So, for example, when we talk about modern synthesis, here are 3 points about it. When we talk about evolution, these are the 4 drivers of evolution. When we talk about the scientific classification, these are the 4 groupings, the 8 groupings, all the way from domain, the biggest, the largest category, 3 domains, all the way down to about 2 million species that have been classified today, right? So you can use this as an example. For example, you can put, and you can give one specific example for Homo sapiens. So you can take Homo sapiens as one example species and just give me the rundown. So you put domain, colon, and what it is, and then kingdom, colon, the kingdom, Animalia, Chordata, etc., all the way down to Homo sapiens, right? It's an example. Okay, so typically 1 or 2, if you need a 3rd page, fine, but I think in 2 pages, it's, if you're able to summarize it, if you need more pages, that's fine, but try to keep it truly as a summary. And the first few that you do will be more trial and error, and I'll give you the feedback, and you'll fine-tune it, all right? So any questions about these little summaries? George?
You say here regular font, what does that mean?
Regular means typically it's either Calibri 10 or 12 or Times New Roman 12 or 11. You know, 10 gets a little small for an old man like me, all right? So just regular standard. This is either Calibri or one of those, or Arial. Arial tends to be bigger, so you have to go down to Arial, maybe 8 or so, if you're going to use that, all right? Okay. That's right. Those are the regular ones that are being used. Okay, let me hold off on the rest of Bio 14, go back to Bio 13. Now, the clincher, Dick and Lewis. Here we go. This is the calendar for the whole course from today till December 16, which is actually graduation. You're invited to see the previous cohort graduate. And in anticipation of your own graduation a year from this December, all right? Now, this is what I mean. These are the modules here. Don't confuse these modules with this week number. I just, for scientists who are obsessed with numbers, I just put week number, but this is kind of irrelevant here. The important one is the date, of course, and then the module number, which matches to the previous 9 modules, okay? Now, what happens is I just listed here the different commitments that I have. So, for example, next Saturday, I'm involved in prison ministry all Saturday, so we won't have live meeting. But I could send you in anticipation the lecture link for 2, if you want to take a look at it. All right, I can do that. And then it happens that the following Saturday is September 2. That's Labor Day weekend, which normally is the Monday, which I think is 4 or something like that, September 4. But you're going to be away on the weekend, and you're going to be around, you're going to be with family. So since Saturday is part of that weekend, I'm saying there's no meeting. Okay, so you have flexibility. But that puts us out 2 weeks. So the next time we'll meet live like this will be on September 9th. All right, and then we go September 16, also lecture. Then there's a convention of the Catholic Psychotherapy Association. I'm giving a talk there, so I'm going to be out that Saturday. Then I have to go to prison 3 times this semester. They let me out at the end of the day, but there's a second one, and the third one is down here in November, right? Then we have lecture. Okay, here, lecture October 14. That's when A7 begins, that other 9-week thing. Ignore that, I just put it as a reference point because definitely you need to be registered into this course by then. All right. Okay. But here we'd have a session live actually. Then there is the Respect Life Conference. This is big actually for us in this field because there's a lot of bioethics in this conference that will be going on. It turns out that there are 7 dioceses in the state of Florida, 7 dioceses, and Miami is the largest one. That's why it's an archdiocese. And there is a Respect Life Conference. Respect Life has to do with issues on human life. Mm-hmm. At the beginning of life, at the end of life, in healthcare, pretty much aligned with the stuff that the program contains. And for the state, it rotates around each diocese hosts that annual conference. And so we get it every 7 years, right? And this year we're up. So it's going to be October 20 and 21st, but 21st is a Saturday, it's the big day, the full day. Friday is just in the evening. And I have several talks there on that conference, and I invite you to go to it if you can. It will bring you up to date on a number of issues that are going on and that we're discussing here in class, okay? But there will be no meeting that day. Then lecture again, then prison again, then 2 more lectures, then there's Thanksgiving, and then there's 2 more lectures, and you'll notice that in this kind of distribution, we actually have an extra day. Just in case we get a little delayed here and we haven't been able to cover the full material, I'll extend a little further down, but we have actually an extra day there just in the back pocket, okay? Then that final Saturday, of course, I mentioned is graduation. So?
Is there a final exam?
No, not as such. Options could be to do like a paper, if you want, like a reflection paper, or a presentation instead in class, all right? So either a reflection paper or a presentation, at least for this first course, because that would get the student more tuned in on gathering their thoughts. And it would be on that, on what would be your personal anthropology. Okay? Incorporating what we've covered in class. What else? The rest is just technicalities. Anything else about the syllabus? No? Covered it exhaustively. Yes. Okay, can we talk a little bit about 514 then? Because then you'll be flying that on your own, basically. So that's the other little paper there, the one sheet. As I mentioned, this is a book that was written by the National Academy of Sciences, and there are many authors. It takes about 2 pages to cover all the authors, but here's the link, and I'll send you this page as an attached, by the way, so that you don't have to copy and paste the thing. You can just click into it, all right, when I send it to you. So let's try this. Control, and then what? Enter? Oh no, left click. Blah, blah, blah. Yes, no, maybe. Let's try again. Control. Oops. Control. Click. Opening. Yeah, some files can contain viruses. Would you like to open this file? Okay. Oops.
It opened on the Explorer, not Chrome.
Oh, an Explorer. Ah, yes, thank you very much. There you go. I'm always happy for the techies in class because no thanks, not now. Okay. Here's a book, but it's further down. You see the little tab here? Okay. So the book, you have to scroll down. There, starts there. Whoop. Let me try down here. Maybe easier. Okay. It's the opening page, and then these are all the acknowledgements, which you'll see very long. Okay, committees upon committees that put this thing together, so it's pretty solid. And eventually there's an actual introduction, chapter 1. It has 13 chapters, but they're mini chapters. Okay, each chapter is about 2, 3, 4 pages long. Yeah, we're fine. All right. But table content. So there's 13 of these. Oh, it's kind of small, right? Let's see. Right. So this is the actual chapter, and then it has little boxes inside, all right, which you include in the summary also. And then it also has these case studies and so forth. So this is chapter 1, introduction, chapter 2, advising, chapter 3, data, chapter 4, mistakes and negligence, etc., etc. So there's 13 of these, and what I need is a little summary of each one of those 13 chapters. Go through it little by little, okay. It covers including authorship, it covers intellectual property, competing interests, conflict of interest, and finally the researcher in society, so the social conscience, the social responsibility of scientific research in society, because whatever a scientist says, some people say they're mad scientists, but other people do take them seriously, whether they say the truth or not. Okay, so there's that social conscience there. All right. Any questions on this one, on being a scientist? Jorge?
So you want us to obviously read this together with the 513 course at the same time?
Yes. In other words, you have until December 7 or whatever it is, December 9, to hand in this. But don't give me the 13 chapters on December 8, okay? So if you can give them to me periodically, I give it to you now so that, especially in those days, that in those Saturdays that we don't have class, you can catch up on this in the meantime, okay? It's kind of parallel reading. This is more technical. This is more on responsible, precisely the title of the course, responsible research and professional conduct. So this also applies professionally in different fields, okay? But it implies some knowledge of scientific data and scientific experimentation and so forth. But that's going to be more on the 513 course, the actual biology, let's say, and theology that I'll be teaching there. Okay? So it's a parallel, but it doesn't...
Like a complement in two different ways.
Yes, and different. This is more on responsible conduct, responsible behavior in doing research. Frankly, these researchers, they're handling millions of dollars, okay? And many of those funds are public funds, so there has to be some accountability. Then the other aspect of this 514 course is that little module that I talked about, or the 3 modules. And that's this thing here. This is a National Resource Center for Scientific Research and Ethics, all right? For short, it's called the Ethics Core. I mentioned earlier, it's housed at the University of Illinois. And 2 aspects of this. First, you have to log in and ask to be invited into the group. Okay, and the group that I've created for this one, for this course, this program, is called Cioffi Bioethics 2017. Let's see if it works. It's restricted. Oh, okay. You have to, it's a little awkward. You have to, there it is. You have to scroll down. Okay. So there, request membership there, you go in that. And you have to do the same thing. You have to log in with the email, use your STU email, all right? And then generate your own password and then log in. What happens is I get an email from the system saying that you're requesting admission or into the group. And then I answer, yes, maybe I'll think about it. Then you're in the group, okay? And then that allows you to do the modules, which are here, all right? So the modules, there are 3 modules, and you go through them step by step. It's all online. And we go back here. I left you another little link down here. This is for the actual modules. Let's see, control, click. Takes you to the same thing, but at this point you would have been registered already, all right? So you go in here, and then the modules will pop up one at a time. You do a little reading, and then you answer the questions. If you answer correctly, you move on to the next one. If it's not correct, you have to read it again and try a different answer, okay? With this one, with these modules, there's a lot of overlap with the book from the NAS. Right, because this is precisely about responsible behavior and research conduct, all right? It'll teach you a little bit more about lab situations and so forth, or data, how to manage data, and things like that.
How many modules is that?
It's a total of 3 modules, and you do them one at a time, and when you finish, when you complete the module, then you get a little certificate, a virtual certificate, and it sends me an email that you have completed that module, all right? So again, you need to have all 3 modules completed by December 9. So you work at it at your own pace. All right, so I think this is pretty self-explanatory, this little sheet here. Any questions about it? No? If you're having difficulty logging in for whatever reason, call me or send me an email or a text, whatever, and we'll go through it together. But you saw the links work for me, so they should work for you too, okay? What else? We're done with the 514. We can go back to 513. Yes. Okay. Okay, it's 10:15. We want to take a few minutes break and then we come back and we'll get more into the subject matter itself. Yeah, all right, 10 minutes. We're back by 10:25. All right. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to stop this for a moment. Stop. Pause recording. Okay. No one reminded me to start the recording. Okay. Oops, there's another one. Machines. Let's see. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Let's try to get into the subject matter as such. All right. In the next hour and a half or so, maybe a couple hours, let's see. So this is the other handout that you have there.
Father,
Yes,
I know
go
in the
ahead.
syllabus it says that the computers are not allowed in the class.
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. Ignore that. Computers are allowed and encouraged. Yes. Sorry about that. Yeah. In fact, sometimes students who have the computer, when there is someone that is going to link online, right now there's no one, but when there is, I ask some of the students to link in to see if it's working. All right. So definitely allowed. So to develop an anthropology that is full, rich, deep, and mysterious, because ultimately we're dealing with mystery, which, by the way, mystery is I like to look at the origin and meaning of words, what is known as the etymology, because especially compound words are very rich, and sometimes we miss the meaning unless we go into the root of that word. So mystery, for example, comes from the Greek mysterion and is translated in Latin into sacramentum. So we see that the sacraments are a mystery because they talk about the presence of God in reality, right, in front of us, specifically in the 7 canonical sacraments that we have. But it's a sacramental life. It's a grace life. It's a life that is mysterious as God's image and exclusively us, right? The whole of creation also, we can say, reflects the image of God, but not like us, because no other, for example, no other creature out there has the capacity to destroy the planet like we do, or to maintain it, or to leave anything behind. Every other creature lives and dies and is recycled back into nature, into nutrients, and they essentially disappear forever unless they leave some kind of a fossil record. Mm-hmm. But we humans, we have what is known as culture, material culture. They call it, actually the anthropologists, they call it material culture, all the stuff that we leave behind, artifacts. No other creature, no other species makes artifacts like we do. And we are masters in making artifacts, right? More and more sophisticated each time, to the point of having not 1, but 2 or 3 jeeps that are going around Mars right now, taking photographs and analyzing the soil and sending that data back to us here. So it is amazing, the technology that we have available. Okay. So one way or another, that is also reflecting God's image. Mm-hmm. Now, We want to develop, what I'm saying is a Judeo-Christian anthropology based on also our Judeo-Christian tradition in the Northwestern Hemisphere, meaning mostly Europe and North America. But we want to do it phylogenetically and ontogenetically. What do I mean by that? Okay, let's start with the second one first. Genesis, genetics, Genesis is a question of origins, right? It's a question of origins. And onto is the being, the individual being. So when we talk about an anthropology or a vision of the human person ontogenetically, we're talking about each individual, each one of us. For example, the basic question, when do we begin? When does human life begin? Already that has social implications, political implications, and ideological implications, but also scientific implications. Because empirically, we can determine empirically from the data when life begins for every species, organically, all right? So ontogenetically means the origin of the individual, of each one of us. Phylogenetically, it's a little different because this is a whole phylum, this is a whole group or class. So when did the human species begin as a whole? You understand that there was a time that we did not exist on Earth as humans, Homo sapiens, but other species were around. For example, the very well-known one is about 70 million years ago, who were around? The dinosaurs, right? The dinosaurs. And we weren't around because mammals didn't have a chance. The biggest mammal around during the time of the dinosaurs was something that looked like a little hot dog with legs and crawled around and buried under the rocks because they didn't have a chance. By the way, the dinosaurs are an example of what is known as runaway evolution, okay? Or runaway selection. It got out of hand. They became more and more voracious and ferocious, and nothing else could essentially exist except them, because they became so voracious, carnivores. Well, there's another group of dinosaurs that are also herbivores that tend to be huge and lived inside ponds. They couldn't move from the swamp until they got eaten by a bunch of the carnivores. And the selection pressure was so strong on that runaway selection that it encouraged some dinosaurs to actually take off and flee from the ground. And that's the beginning of birds. You know, the birds today are classified within the reptilians. And you can think of a feather as a highly sophisticated scale, because it's essentially the same material. The chemists would know it's a collagen protein. And keratin, the hair is the same. Okay, so we want to develop an anthropology that is fair and honors nature, the scientific data that is undeniable, but at the same time is open to a religious or a spiritual interpretation, because we're not just one other species here on Earth. If we were, we wouldn't have developed all the material culture and including the worship that we have developed. No other animal prays, for example, or worships anything, right? They basically live by instinct. And so where did this worship come from? Some kind of intuition that there is something else. No other animal buries their dead. Why would we do that? And it comes out spontaneously and simultaneously in many different primitive cultures of Earth, thousands and thousands of years ago. So it must be something that is universal to the human species and unique to the human species. Art is another one. No other animal does art. So these are things that are pointing one way or another to the fact that we have a conscience, a spirit, a soul, something that is metaphysical. Also, we want to ground that anthropology, or that anthropology will allow us to establish the dignity of the human person. Not based on a committee or society or what my family thinks of me and so forth. It's not contingent on anyone else, but rather intrinsic, that we, each individual human being, has an intrinsic value and worth for the mere reason of being human, the mere fact of being human. You see that this already has implications on social policy and other issues that are occurring in society today. For example, already 5 states in the nation, in the United States, have legalized physician-assisted suicide. In other words, that if I basically have either intractable pain or totally disgusted with my existence, I can request a doctor to prescribe me death medication. All right? 5 states, that's 10% of the union. All right? And in Europe, it's even more advanced because now they're going into involuntary euthanasia. Who decides? A committee, the government, the estate owners, or aspirants. See? Has implications on the intrinsic dignity of the human person. And we want to dip into the evidence for this intrinsic dignity of the human person, this rich and full anthropology, ontogenetically and phylogenetically, from the evidence, the proof from science and faith. All right? So on science, it's going to be essentially evolution. Evolution is the interpretation key today for nature, for any organic process, for the existence of the species. Like I said, the 2 million species more or less that have been classified so far. The key of interpretation and exploration and research and even teaching is evolution. So we have to get into it. On the side of faith, the 2 pillars of the Judeo-Christian tradition, the 2 pillars are what we call the Bible and tradition, tradition with a capital T. So on the Bible side, 73 books, 46 of the Old Testament, 27 in the New Testament. We'll get more into that in the second half of the course, and we'll look at the actual Hebrew scriptures with the interlinear translation, word by word, particularly the book of Genesis, where creation is described, right? The 6 days of creation, and then on the 7th, God rested, as if he needed rest. So we have to, that's the key of interpretation there. It's one of the 4 traditions that influence the first 5 books of the Bible, called the Pentateuch, and one of those 4 traditions is called the priestly tradition, intent on keeping the Sabbath, the Shabbat, holy, and that's why on the 7th day God rested. If God rests, who are we not to rest? Okay, so you see, that gives you already a key of interpretation of Genesis 1, the first chapter of Genesis, which is the one most disputed, in apparent contradiction with evolution. Because either God created it or Darwin created it, right? So it's a misunderstanding on both sides. Let's go a little deeper. So I'm going to be focusing for the next several lectures precisely on the process of evolution, the how. Everything evolves, really. At the end of the day, you know, this computer is iteration X of the primitive thing that existed in the 70s there on the 5th floor of Primera Casa at FIU. When I was in my 20s, going back to that experience, that one building had everything, had the library, had the cafeteria, had registration, had the classrooms, had the labs, and then finally on the 5th story, the 5th floor, it was divided into 2 big areas. Half of it was administration, including the president's office and all the executives of the university, all right? The other half of the 5th story of the first building of FIU was a computer, one computer, the half of that story. And they were the all Univacs, they're huge, they look like refrigerators like this, and they had this that went back and forth like that, right? And it was all behind a glass panel, And we as students love to go up there and look at all this machine because they kept it at about 50 degrees temperature because it heated up so much, right? Oops. Okay. Yes, there's technology. Has a mind of its own. Anyway, that those old UNIVACs, right, that took up one single computer, a whole half of this building, and the original programs were done in cards. I don't know if you've ever seen those, maybe in museums. I don't know what's going on. Each command was on a card, a reading card that had to be fed into the machine, all right? And for example, if you had a letter M, that was one card. And then the next letter was another card, comma, period, space. Each one of those was a card, and that had to be fed in through the computer. And if you misplaced one of those cards, the whole program would be shot because then it had a nonsense in it, all right? I don't know what's going on. Should we try to fix it? And turn them off. Oh, I'm back. I don't know what's going on. Okay. And there were literally, a program included hundreds of these cards. I remember one time there was a fellow at the supermarket checking out some stuff, and he was with his wife buying something, and the wife was taking care of the payment while he was sorting and weeding his cards. Right? He had it on a tray, on a track like this, and he was weeding, making sure that all the commands were correct. And somehow he fumbled, and the whole thing tipped over. And the hundreds of cards went on the floor in the supermarket, and people walking over it, around it, and it was a royal mess. You know, today we have this that we call a phone. This is not a phone, right? This is a computer. Because I know what a real phone is like. It's a plastic box like this, which has a handle with a wire. That's a phone. But a phone never had a camera, never had internet, and all that. So this is really the true microcomputer in our pocket. This probably has 1,000, if not probably 1,000 times more power than those old UNIVACs. And that was 40 some odd years ago. So in our own lifetime, what we've seen is just amazing. The ramping up of technology. It's beginning to get annoying. How can we correct this? I can try to turn them off or turn them on.
Has that ever happened before?
No. How about we turn them on?
Yeah, that's
Perfect.
Okay. Okay. See what I say? Technology is great when it works, and when it doesn't, it's very frustrating because there's another mystery. There's another mystery of faith going on here.
Maybe, yeah.
Which I don't really understand. Now they're off. Well, there's some kind of master control, and someone remotely somewhere else in the world is playing with those controls.
And there's like a hidden camera, like, ha, suckers.
Yeah, exactly. We're being televised through all this. All right. So process. Process evolution is about the how, the process. Okay, how things happen organically. And you'll be surprised, almost amazed how mechanical it really is. I mean, from the chemical perspective, you know that, because at the chemical level, it's about the structure. And the structure is according to the function, all right? And we'll see that. And if it happens at the atomic level and at the subatomic level, it also keeps augmenting at the different layers. It goes at the molecular level, it goes at the cellular level, it goes at the tissue, organ, and the whole system level until you get eventually to the entire ecosystem. So there's one aspect of life, of organic life on Earth, including human life, that is very mechanical. That it follows, if it's mechanical, it follows the laws of physics. Okay, the four main events for evolution are listed here: mutation, migration, drift, and selection. Right? Mutation and recombination, we'll go more in depth in these probably next time when you have a little chance to read up on your textbook. But mutation and recombination are going to be at the genetic level, at the molecular level, in the DNA. Within the cells of the body, but specifically the gametes, the sex cells, because those are the ones that are being passed on. If you think about it, talk about mechanic and mechanistic. The entire species is passed on from one generation to the next in two microscopic cells. One from the male, the other one from the female, who have to unite and fuse to form the new individual, the zygote, which is still microscopic. All right? And within that microscopic cell, there's an organelle called the nucleus, which is even more microscopic. And within that nucleus is the entire genome, the whole genetic code for the human, the 3 billion base pairs that makes up the human genome within that nucleus of that cell, of that zygote. So talk about packaging. It is passed on, and that's the origin of the new individual, which will come out to be over time and decades and nourishment like you and I. And it's all there. The entire blueprint is within that nucleus of that cell for every single species. So we see there's a universality about the genetic code. Every single species that we have studied so far reproduces the same way. It's really amazing. It works, okay? And it maintains life on Earth in an expanding way, because we see an expansion of species occurring. There's what is known as a ramification or expansion of species, where the tendency is to have a greater quantity and a greater quality variety of species on Earth. So obviously, going backwards on that chronology, one is going back to common ancestry. And if we go back far enough, we should get to the very root of a single organic cell that is the prototype for all living things that exist today. All right, about 3.5 billion years later, including the human species, organically speaking. And while I'm on the genome thing, all right, we can do a little something here. Just open another page for a moment. Oops. I mentioned 3 billion base pairs. Simultaneously, we're going to do a little math here and there, okay? Don't get scared. We're going to do fine. And also preparing you, what do I want? I want a new document. Where's, oh, here, sorry. Yes, and also preparing a little bit for the statistics course that will come eventually in the summer of next year, okay? We'll look at normal distribution and standard deviations and histograms and stuff like that. It's pretty neat. But just do a little math. So base pairs. Is that big enough, or should I go bigger? Go big.
This is in regards to mutation.
This is DNA. This is DNA. So let's just talk about DNA. DNA. And the human genome. We'll stick with the human genome. The human genome, a genome is all of the DNA, all of the genes of any particular species. That's called the genome, okay? The human genome is approximately 3 billion base pairs. And within those 3 billion base pairs, there's about 20,000 genes. Anywhere from 10 to 20 is still up for grabs, from 10 to 20,000. Now let's look at the 3 billion base pairs first. Whoops. $3 billion is 3, how many zeros? 1 million is 6 zeros, right? And 1 billion is the following, is 9 zeros, yes. And this number is so large that there's even a discrepancy between the American billion and the European billion. because for us in the US, a billion is 9 zeros, okay? This is also known as, in scientific notation, 3 times 10 to the 9th. Someone taught me how to do a superscript, but I forget. Remember?
Control Alt plus.
Control Alt plus. All that, and then the number?
Yeah.
Control Alt plus. No, maybe just Control Alt. Maybe, what? Highlight it? And Control Alt plus? Well,
Or you can go to.
there's another way. Yeah, I can go in here and superscript, right? That should do it. Oops. Okay. Now it's too small. Yes. So I was saying that in the US, a billion is 10 to the 9. In Europe, a billion is 10 to the 12. It's a million. So if you think about it, really, a billion for us is 1,000 million, right? But for the Europeans, 1,000 million is 1,000 million, bilione, miliardo. But the billion is a million. All right? So it's 10 to the 12. So that number is really so large that we don't even agree on the terminology. Right? That's why it's also important to use scientific notation, because then 9 is not 12. That's what we're talking about. But anyway, it's huge. Now, there's another aspect which is known as percentage homology. I got to stop because this is going to give me small. No, okay. And how about what we call percentage homology? Talk about evolution. Percentage homology, yeah, it's doing this in superscript, right? Is the degree of compatibility that there is between different species. The degree of compatibility between different species. So for example, I can tell you that between the human and the orangutan, there is, what kind of percentage homology do you think we have? Homology meaning similarity at the DNA level, and therefore at the protein level also, because the protein is the DNA expressed, right? Let's stay with the DNA for now, with the genome, right? These 3 billion base pairs. Percentage homology means what percentage of these 3 billion are identical.
Is it 97%?
In the human, 97% with the chimpanzee, all right? Yes. I'm sorry, I'm talking orangutan. Because it's part of the primates. So we've all seen orangutans, blonde fellow. Okay. Can look a little human, but at the end of the day, it's still an animal that lives on the trees, naked and so forth. Okay? With much
90% compatibility.
97% homology. In other words, if I take my DNA or your DNA or anyone's DNA, the 9 billion base pairs, 97% of those are identical in the orangutan genome. 97% of them, okay? That 3% makes a big difference, right? Yep. How about with the gorilla? Looks a little bit more like us, I think. At least this guy stands on 2 legs periodically, not all the time. Okay? Okay? Can even stick his tongue out and can look upset or something. 98% homology with the gorilla. 98% of our 9 billion base pairs, or 3 billion base pairs. There's another fellow that tops it, It's even closer to us. Chimpanzee. Pan-troglodytes. Ever heard someone calling you you're a troglodyte? Well, that's what they're talking about. Or you look like a troglodyte. They're beginning to look a little more human. Okay, but the misconception is that we don't descend from the monkey and the monkey does not descend from us. Why? Because we're both living at the same time. And by definition, there are no contemporary ancestors. Okay, by definition, ancestors are before. And so we have common ancestors. We have common ancestors. Percentage homology with a chimp, 99%. 99%. Identical DNA between the human and the chimp. In fact, he has one set more chromosomes. We have 23 pairs, they have 24 pairs of chromosomes. That's just the way the thing is packaged, all right, during mitosis. But yeah, 99% homology with this fellow here. However, so that 1% makes a big difference, right? But we're talking about 3 billion base pairs. So when we take 1% of this, which is the difference, right? Or then we're actually looking at, let's see. Yeah. 1%, yeah, I think so. So 1% of the 3 billion. So 1% we have to take away 2 zeros, right? And rearrange the commas. Oops. Just deleted another 0. Here. And here. So we'll go to commas. What does that mean? That we still have 30 million base pairs unique to the human, just on the math. In other words, the 1% that is unique actually involves 30 million base pairs. And you can pack a lot of information on 30 million base pairs. Basically, you can pack the information for a human as opposed to a chimpanzee. That's number one. Number two, it turns out that of these 3 billion base pairs, or the whole genome, it's called the genome, all right? Most of it is what is known as junk DNA. Now, junk DNA, put it in quotations, because it just means, it's another word for saying that we don't know what it does. In other words, it doesn't code for any known protein, all right? Junk DNA.
The junk DNA is in reference to what?
To the genome.
To the genome.
To the genome. So the 3 billion base pairs, all right? Most of that is junk DNA, meaning that it doesn't code for a particular protein. It's not a coding region. This means that is non-coding regions. Therefore, no proteins expressed. And that is, what percentage do you think of our genome is junk, in quotations, meaning that we haven't found that there's any coding sequence there? 5%, 20%, 80%, 90%, 100%. Can be 100%, right? Because we produce some proteins. There is coding region. The coding region of the DNA, at least for the human, is only about 3%. It's coding. So 97% is junk, right? Meaning that it doesn't code for any particular protein. It may have other functions. It may have what we call higher order structure function. But for now, the coding, all the proteins, all the genes, those 20,000 genes or those 10,000 genes, whatever they are, are only included, are only contained in 3% of our DNA, of the 3 billion base pairs. And that's why we can spare, that's why we can have a high percentage homology with other species, because we also have homology on the junk. Who cares? All right. In other words, a DNA, the genome of every species over millions of years has accumulated junk in it. It's like the closet in our homes that has a lot of junk stored in there, and we don't use it year after year, right? But it's in there. That also happens at the base pair level. We have accumulated mostly from viruses that have inserted literally into our DNA and are just in there hanging around. Some of them are called transposons, and some of them jump around within the genome, okay? But what I'm trying to point out is that really a lot of our genome has no known function, and yet we carry it around, and it's okay. It can still pack in there into that nucleus of that cell, of every cell of our body. Amazing, eh? When we think the capacity for information, for storing information, it really leaves the computer at a very primitive stage. Because how many millions and millions of cells could we put inside one of these single chip of a computer, of a microcomputer? Okay, so 95%. It would be more or less equivalent to looking at, see if I still have it. I don't have it, but let me bring it up. You know how we were looking at the syllabus for a moment? And it has 6 pages. And there's a lot of information in these 6 pages, right? In fact, that's the 6 pages right there, it's too small. So that's a way of tiling them. Anyway, so here are the 6 pages, right? A lot of, so each one of the, you can consider each letter, for example, and even each space and so forth as a base pair, because it's information, it's informative, it's there. But really, at the end of the day, what is the one single most important line about this whole syllabus that is 6 pages long? What do you think? I mean, there are probably thousands of letters here, right? Not 3 billion, but quite a few thousand.
It's the most important phrase? Or
actually, it's 2,300 pages, words, there it is. Okay, give you a hint, it's on page 6. It's a single line. The one most important, if you had to choose a single most important line from this whole syllabus of 6 pages, that really gives you the key to the whole course, in fact, to the whole program. Interesting. Well, I propose to you that it is this one line here. Today's lecture. Why? Because if you come to today's lecture, you know that this is being recorded. I've given you all the breakdown of the course, etc., etc. Pretty much after this, today's lecture, you could fly pretty much on your own, remotely, and so forth. So my opinion, the most critical, the most informative line in the whole 6 pages is this one line there. So that's kind of a way of looking at genes. Of those 3 billion base pairs, only 3% is a coding region, but those 3% contain the 10 to 20,000 proteins that make up our body. Most of those are regulatory proteins that define all the metabolic pathways of life, of organic life, in the human body and in any other body. So who cares if we're 99% compatible with a chimp? It could be that the bulk of the coding region is in that 1% of the DNA. Okay, so it's in the detail. It's not just the whole genome, because there's a lot of junk there, like I'm saying. You're with me? All right, so just kind of analogically. But what's interesting is that nature has worked this out, that the genome is universal, that the molecule, the inheritance molecule is DNA, or in a few exceptions, mostly on viruses, RNA, which can be considered a precursor to DNA, because RNA is a single strand, whereas DNA is a double strand, a double helix. We'll get into that also at the biochemical level.
So
Okay.
Cioffi said, so it comes from one source.
That's the theory. It remains a theory because that source is no longer around. But we could trace it, and that's what I mean phylogenetically. When we start looking at percentage homology, I say we have 99% homology with the chimp, 98, 97. Those are the other 3 primates that exist. So we have 4 primates, right, on Earth. The 3 old world monkeys, as they're known, and then us. But then we also have a percentage homology with mammals, with other mammals. Let's say with a zebra. I'm going to throw a number out. Maybe it's 90% homology with a zebra. But we also have a homology with crabs, okay? Because they're also animals, but they're not vertebrates. So maybe we have a 50% homology with a crab. And we may have 40% homology with a fly. And you keep tracing it back, we may have 20% homology with bacteria that look nothing like us. Single cell, prokaryotes, not an organized nucleus. So really, at the end of the day, there's percentage homology between every living species at different levels.
So does that support or breaks down that, saying that evolution does or does not exist?
So it's an evidence in favor of evolution, because then you can do a percentage homology map. And those 2 million species that I keep talking about, you can put them on a map and see the percentage compatibility, and it's all pointing to a common origin. It's pointing to a common origin.
Please forgive my question.
No, please, go.
I have no background in this.
Yeah. No, but but you see what I'm saying? This percentage homology among all living species at the DNA level, okay, is one of the evidence for evolution, that evolution has been occurring all along. However, it's going to remain always at the theory level because we don't have the original organisms any longer. At best, we have some remnant, which is the fossil record, all right, and that's only hard tissue. Soft tissue doesn't preserve. Because the hard tissue, which is basically bone or teeth or something like that, becomes calcified, becomes crystallized, becomes like a stone. And then it's preserved for millions of years. Okay? But soft tissue doesn't preserve, breaks down. And so that's why, since we no longer have direct access to the original species, evolution will remain a theory forever. But it's the best and simplest explanation that we have for the variety of species that we see today and the percentage homology between these species. Okay? We'll get more into it, and you'll see that it starts making sense. And but what's even more important and more relevant for us as people of faith is that it does not necessarily contradict the action of God, all right, on creation. We maintain the supremacy of God as creator, and you'll see how that fits in. Because someone had to invent evolution. And the laws, evolution is, se rige, has to abide by certain laws. It's not chaos, all right? And so who's the inventor of those laws, right? So back to, yes. All this to say that mutation and recombination are at the DNA level, at the molecular level. Within the nucleus, within the cell, within the organ tissues of every organic body. Whereas migration or gene flow is at the level of the individual and more properly at the level of the population that is moving around. And there are all kinds of populations of animals, plants, fungi, etc. Drift is a different kind of action, and it's essentially randomness working on a specific population, because every population is like a sample of the whole species. The human in this case is not a very good example of this. I have to give you different example. Just give me a favorite animal that you have. Anybody? The dog. Okay. The dog may not be too good. Okay, we'll go with the dog. We'll go with the dog. Because the dog is actually a wolf. It's Canis lupus familiaris. But let's stick with the dog. How many species of dogs are there? I mean, say many.
Yeah.
I mean, say few.
Many,
One.
many, many.
The rest don't care. Okay. One. There's one species of dogs. There are many varieties or races, okay, or breeds, whatever they're called. But there's one species of dogs, Canis lupus familiaris. All right? There's one species of dog. And at least theoretically, apart from the logistics of the size of the dogs, theoretically, every dog could interbreed with each other. So I can take the egg of a Chihuahua and fertilize it with the sperm of a Great Dane, et cetera, et cetera. Now, whether they're physically, physiologically, they can work it out or not, is a different story, okay? But at least biologically, genetically, embryologically, any sperm of any dog, in principle, can fertilize the egg of any other dog, of any other race of dog, because they're all the same species, and that's precisely what defines biological species, that they can reproduce, all right? The two individuals that can reproduce and generate a viable, a fertile offspring. It's a double definition for the biological. We're going to use the biological definition of species. Two individuals that can reproduce and generate a viable offspring and a fertile offspring. Because then you get also the interbreeding of different species that are very similar. Okay? For example, a tiger and a lion. Felix tigris, Felix leo. They're different species, but they're same genus. They're both Felix or Felix, okay? So they can interbreed, but the offspring is sterile, unfertile. And by the way, it has a name also. Anybody know?
Liger.
The liger, exactly. The liger, and there are some in the in the zoo. Okay. Also,
They're
liger.
Sorry, I was typing in.
They're infertile. They're typically hybrids. They're called hybrids, and typically hybrids are infertile. Sometimes, every now and then, you get a fertile hybrid, but the offspring of that hybrid is going to be infertile. So it's dead end either on the first generation, on the F1, or on the F2.
That get that confused.
Exactly, which is an interbreed between, it's a hybrid between horse and donkey. All right, I don't know which was male, which is female, but basically horse is one species, donkey is another species, but they have the same genus, I think it's Equus. And then they have the hybrid mule, but the mules typically are sterile. So the definition, the biological definition of a species is that they can interbreed and produce a fertile offspring. They can reach reproductive age. So population, then, there are populations of dogs throughout the world. Locally, there's a population of dogs in Hialeah. Some are wild, some are at home, okay? So those are populations. Then there's a population of dogs in Wichita, Kansas. The vast majority of the population of those two populations will never mix, right? Will never interbreed. We assume that most of the dogs in Miami will not visit Wichita and vice versa. Some will, but it's certainly too far to walk, so they would have to be transported by the human. All right, But see what I'm saying? A population is always of a single species, but two or more individuals. It can be a few individuals, like for example, a pack of wolves may only have half a dozen in the pack, all right? Or it could be a huge population of hundreds or thousands, for example, a group of sardines, a population of sardines in a particular local area of the ocean. Could be hundreds or maybe thousands of sardines. They're all the same species, but they form one population. In the North Atlantic, which is going to be different from the population of sardines of the same species in the North Pacific. So we have populations, and two things about the population. Number one, all of the individuals in that population are of the same species. And number two, they are delimited by a particular geographical region. So that we have many different populations of dogs throughout the world. But whatever population of dog we land into, it's all the same species. It's always Canis lupus familiaris. Right? And so theoretically, because they are of the same species, theoretically, they could interbreed. Okay, so drift refers to the fact that what is the fullest representation of the dog variety, of all the breeds of dogs? What is the fullest possible representation?
I think you said it, the wolf.
No, not at all. Wolf is Canis lupus. Is not the domesticated dog. It's a different species. Okay? Some people say the dog is a subspecies of the wolf, but they naturally don't interbreed, the wolf and the dog. All right. So, rather, what is the fullest possible population or representation of the dog, of the species dog? We would have to cluster all of the dog populations of the world. We would have to say every single dog in the world. That is the fullest population, the fullest representation of all the dog breeds in the world is all of the dogs that presently exist in the world. Okay? It's probably millions of them, I don't know. But any one population, let's say the population of dogs in Miami, in Dade County, probably several hundred, maybe thousands, between some that are wild and many that are domesticated. Maybe you have a dog at home. Who has a dog at home? Okay, okay. So you have two of the, how many dogs do you have?
I have one.
One and two. Okay, so you have 3 of the 1,000, let's say, of the 5,000 dogs that are in Dade County. So let's say that that's a population, theoretically. That's a population of dogs in Dade County, different from the one in Wichita, Kansas. All right. This population of the 2,000 dogs, including the 3 of yours, do they represent all of the breeds that of dogs in the world? No. I mean, without actually knowing them, I think it's pretty safe to say that there may be some breed that is somewhere in the world that is not represented in this population of Miami dogs. That's drift. Why? Because that particular breed, that particular variety of curly blue hair with no tail doesn't exist in this population of Miami. So that's drift. It's a chance thing. In other words, no one population of any species is fully representative of the entire species. You'd have to cluster all of the populations of that one species to have the full representation, to have the 100%. So really every population becomes a sample, what they call statistically a sample. It's like if we sample 100 people, or we sample 1,000 people, we sample 1,000,000 people, that's pretty representative. Or we happen to be 7 billion people. So to have really the full representation of the whole human, of the full human population, we'd need a sample, we'd need the whole 7 billion. So really, no one population on Earth is fully representative of that species. There's some variety that is missing. See, conceptually? And that's what we mean by drift. Because realistically, we cannot deal with all the dogs in the world. We have to deal with the dogs, even in just dealing with the dogs in Miami is already a big thing. Let's say we have to take a blood sample of all the dogs in Miami. That's going to cost quite a bit of money. And it's going to take quite a few months, maybe years, who knows? And that's just Miami. Imagine the hundreds of thousands of cities that are in the world with dogs. So every population, by definition, is drift, has a genetic drift, okay?
And so this drift, as you kind of mentioned, is caused by either migration, weather patterns.
Yeah, randomness. Randomness, really, in the mathematical sense, is randomness, in the sense that not all individuals of that species are represented in any one population. And then you add the dynamics of it precisely. That's what is pushing toward evolution, is that these populations typically move around. They move around. Some die, some move, okay? Then they interbreed and create new varieties. So you're already getting a flavor of the whole issue of evolution, which has to do about variety, 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 variety. And then the most successful varieties survive being selected out. They have that little advantage, the little edge. Turns out that short tail didn't get caught on the door, so that little dog survived better. And typically the selection is going to come because really what really affects evolution at the end of the day of all these four is natural selection, okay? Which is really just basically means it's a selecting out process. But typically, when there is some kind of change in the environmental conditions, if the environmental conditions stay pretty much the same, selection is not acting very strongly, at least natural selection. There could be competition and so forth, yes. But when you really get selection, when a species start getting selected out, and typically it's a selecting out process, is when environmental, the conditions change and start begin to change more dramatically. Like with the example of global warming, for example, because that's at the global level. That's affecting first the vegetation, the plant species. That is, the poles are becoming tropicalized, so you expect a more temperate and tropical species to move northward and southward, populating areas that were not populated before. And then that's going to have an impact on the consumers of those producers, on the animals, first the herbivores, then the carnivores that feed on the herbivores, and you start changing the ecosystem. All right? The species that have the advantage will tend to survive. The ones that are weaker on the tails of the normal distribution, they're going to be selected out. Okay, so you're getting a flavor. This is still at the introductory level, right? But these are basically the four events that drive evolution, which Darwin calls descent with modification. Darwin was big on modification, on the variation, on variety. You can look at two flowers of the same species, and they look very similar, and even today they may look identical, but if we start getting picky and go down to the microscopic level, they're not going to be identical. All right? Some will have, one flower will have a little more pigment than the other may have a few more cells than the one, etc. But no two flowers of the same species in the same plant are going to be identical carbon copy exactly. Take it to the extreme, identical twins, right? There are two kinds of twins, even in the human, right? They're called the two kinds of twins. One is fraternal twin, the other one is identical twins, right? The fraternal twins can be boy or girl, right? Because how are they generated biologically? Fraternal twins, not identical. One can fraternal twins be, one can be a boy, the other one can be a girl.
Not changing my eggs.
Exactly. that woman in that particular period, that particular cycle, she actually ovulated 2 eggs. And the 2 eggs got fertilized because you got millions of sperms around. So whatever egg is around is going to get fertilized on average, right? So she ovulated 2 eggs instead of 1. On average, normally the cycle is 1 egg at a time, but she ovulated 2. And because there are millions of sperms around, both got fertilized and both survived, both became zygote, both implanted, both survived, 9 months, they were born. And guess what? Their 2 were born at the same time, therefore they're twins. But one's a boy and one's a girl, therefore they're not identical, right? Those are fraternal, no problem. But we also have identical twins. Identical twins look almost 99.9999% alike, right? Or they're not 100% alike. Where do they come from? How do they come about?
2 sperm, right?
Actually, 1 sperm, 1 egg.
Yeah.
Because 2 sperm, 1 egg is going to be a gross anomaly. You have 1 egg, and you have 1 sperm, you have 2 sperm. Let's say the 2 sperm hit exactly at the same time. They both deposit their nucleus inside the pronucleus. Now you got, on the female pronucleus, you have 23 chromosomes, right? Each sperm also has 23 chromosomes. You got 23 plus 23, 46, plus another 23 from a second sperm. 46 plus 23, now you're at 60, what? 69, all right? 69 is a highly abnormal number of chromosomes, and that's going to cause abnormalities. And so that little zygote is not going to survive, probably will die even at implantation, typically will be the selection process. That's natural selection. A grossly abnormal, not going to implant, will be discarded naturally by the mom. She wouldn't even notice because implantation is within 5 to 7 days after fertilization. She may just think she's late on her period, but she's actually having a very early spontaneous abortion, which is natural selection, because that little embryo was grossly abnormal and never implanted. So we have to go back and reformulate. We only need 1 sperm in there to match up the 23 chromosomes, the compatibility. So it's 1 egg, 1 sperm, 1 zygote, who, as he or she was starting to divide, at the first few cell, let's say at the first mitosis, the first cellular division, when 1 cell divides into 2 through the normal process of mitosis, normally they stay together. But in the case of twins, they separated. So when you have, at the early stage, it's called the morula, right? Where that zygote split into 2 within the first 24 hours of fertilization, the first mitotic division. Now you got these 2 cells. The chromosomes have undergone duplication and so forth, so each one has a full set of chromosomes, each cell, but they separate from each other. Then you essentially end up with 2 zygotes again. Those 2 zygotes implant and grow, and you got identical twins. Necessarily, they have to be of the same sex, either both boys or both girls. And it can happen within the first 5 days, 5 to 7 days, actually within the first 14 weeks, even after implantation, you can still have a separation of the mass, of the cell mass of the blastocyst into 2 embryos, sometimes even into 4. And you get quadruplets, all right, who are identical, but not exactly. They're 99.999%, but they'll be, even if they look identical, and you could actually take a photo of one and superimpose into the photograph of another. When you go down to the cellular level, one twin will have a few more cells than the other, so that's not identical. And there will be some variety, and then even behaviorally, for sure, they're going to be 2 different personalities. They have grown together, everything, but they are 2 different personalities. Okay, so there's always variety, and Darwin emphasized variety all the time because he saw in variety the lead toward speciation or evolution in the variety. And there's always variety in any particular population that we look at, from bacteria to whales.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
It's might be unrelated in a way, but so how do you end up with, like, why would a cell mass split? Why would it would it still, it duplicates and then that just
Yeah.
splits?
It's not really known because we don't want to experiment with human embryos, even some people are. But it's not exactly known, but there's a cohesion that has to do with the cohesion adhesion theory of how the cells stay together, okay? The junctures and how the cells stay together. But let's say that in those first stages of the first 2 weeks of embryonic development, that mass of cells is still very plastic, very dynamic, very elastic. And one possible way of looking at it is a type of asexual reproduction. It's a type of fission, binary fission, like it occurs in other animals, in lower animals. In fact, Spemann was doing these experiments at the beginning of last century. He was taking embryos of frogs, amphibians, and they are particularly plastic and dynamic. And he would take embryos of, let's say, at the 4 stage cell or at the H cell stage of the little frog embryo, and would tease apart the 8 blastomeres. Blastomere is the name for the embryonic cells. He would tease them apart. From each one of those 8 cells, he would get a new frog, a total functional frog, fertile and everything, right? They would all have the same sex, either male or female, but he would get viable, fertile frogs from each one of those cells. So essentially it means that those individual cells in the first couple of weeks of embryonic development have a tremendous plasticity. They're really, scientifically it's called they're totipotent. They have totipotency, right? So all of the genes potentially can still express. So there's a plasticity, and my opinion, scientifically, is that this is a vestigial type of asexual reproduction that we have in the human and in mammals in general for identical twins. The more drastic example is a third type of twinning that is very dramatic and challenging. They're called conjoined twins, right? Used to be called Siamese twins, conjoined twins, when the twins are actually fused by part of the body. In other words, the separation was partial, was not total or radical. And they maintain some of the cells stayed together and some of the cells did separate. So typically they could be joined either at the trunk, sometimes at the head, sometimes they share internal organs, sometimes they could share a brain or part of the brain. It's very drastic, and conjoined twins really elicit a lot of compassion because it depends on the degree on how many vital organs they share, whether they can be separated or not. But then some twins actually do share some vital organs and they cannot be separated and still viable without killing one or the other. So they're left alone and they manage and they learn to live together with one another for the rest of their lives. And they kind of carry each other around. And they dress each other, they roll on bed, and they do very strange things to live and live a more or less normal life as much as possible.
Father, are they seen as two separate individuals?
You tell me, what would be needed, do you think? What organs could they share and still be two individuals? And what organ in particular would have to be unique?
The heart.
The brain, right? We can put the seat of conscience in the brain, because let's say that we can do this mental experiment. A person who tragically, a soldier, walked on a landmine and blew their legs off. So now we have a person who has no legs, but has a trunk, arms, and head. Obviously, they're a human being, they're an individual, they can live, a human person, and sometimes they can do prosthesis, otherwise the person may be restrained to a wheelchair. What if they lost the 2 arms also? Well, now we're down to a trunk and a head, but that's still a human being with or without the prosthesis, right? Theoretically, we could supply the vital organs, the functionality of the vital organs, if we manage to circulate the blood and purify the blood and supply the nourishment that is needed in the blood to keep the brain alive, to keep the head alive. Because really, when you think about it, we have all 5 senses within the head. We sort of have the eyes, the ears, the nose, the mouth, and touch. So all five senses, external senses, reside within the head. So it's a drastic example, but I would say we just had the head that was organically living, we still have a human being. Because the rest, the trunk, the rest of the body is servicing the head. You think about it, who's servicing what? So, and I remember when I was doing my first doctorate back in the 90s, my PI, the professor, my mentor, he wrote an article on head transplants, right? Because it was still theoretical back then, but now some are seriously thinking about it. When you think about it, really, is it a head transplant? It's actually a body transplant. It's the head that is getting a new body. It's not a body that is getting a new head. Because where is the seed of consciousness of that between the head and the body? Where's the consciousness? The head. This body that will be attached to this head will supply the life for that head. So it's a body transplant. It's a full body transplant.
I don't know, I mean, this is like a side note, but that's where it gets a little tricky, because then
gets very tricky.
Right, how would you, the whole question even of the soul, the immortal spirit, which I know we're not even there yet, but definitely that's also a reality that is in play. You know, what is the point that you can say, well, this is another person, or this is the same person? How do you...
So again, where does that spirit or soul or consciousness reside? My arm cannot make ethical decisions, not even my heart. We speak about the heart analogically, but the heart really, organically, is a muscle. It's a cardiac muscle, it's a pump. The heart is not deciding anything. It's the brain that's deciding, right? So really the seat of consciousness, I would say for a person that is full body, the full body has the spirit, all right, or the soul.
Right.
But if the person is missing parts of the body, whatever is left of the body is still the consciousness. If only the head is left, well, the consciousness is within that head. Without the head, then that's a different story. Because we can have consciousness with only the head, but we cannot have consciousness without the head, right?
Right. So then that would be, would it even be possible to do a brain transplant?
Well, that was his whole argument. And he was looking at it from a theological perspective, but considering that eventually medicine will get there. I don't know if you know, have you ever heard of Christy Arias? Maybe in the Hispanic world, people have heard of her. She's a beautiful singer. She's been here in Miami for decades, and she sings in Radio Paz, a very religious person, very devout. Christy Arias has a beautiful voice. Her husband, Miguel, I know them from way back in the 80s when I was at a parish in South Miami at Epiphany. There were parishioners there. It was a young couple. They had 3 or 4 kids and very dynamic in the parish. One day, he was doing weights on the bench, and he fell off the bench, and he severed his neck, and he became quadriplegic. Just like that. In the blink of an eye, he's saying, Christy, I can't move, I don't feel anything. And they called the paramedics, and he was paralyzed from the head down. This was about 30 years ago. He's still alive today, and he paints. He was a painter back then. Now he's gained a little bit of motion from one of the hands, and he paints with that. But he's essentially in a wheelchair. Imagine if eventually the technology is there to reconnect all the vessels with a young man, or who was, I think it would have to be a man, not a woman, because of the identity, right? Let's say you have a young man who's totally healthy, has a great body, but he's a motorcycle rider. And he's doing the races from Key Biscayne to down there to Dayland at 3 a.m., like they do, and one of them gets hit and he's decapitated instantly like that. And the body is available in some future where everything can be reconnected. We have this body that is available. Tragic, he happened to have donated his body to science before the race. I'm just posing a hypothetical scenario that could happen. Mm-hmm. In fact, jokingly, because I know some students are motorcycle riders, and they say, oh yes, Father, we're organ donors. I know, we're organ donors. The folly of the youth, but what are you going to do? But, it could happen. It could happen. It does happen. Trauma happens, and organs are transplanted. In fact, we have a whole lecture on organs transplantation later in the course, in the program. But the point is that, is it ethical or not to do a full body transplant? You don't have to answer right now. We can go through the program, and when we get to healthcare bioethics and look at transplants, we can decide yeah or nay. But drastic, but if the technology is available. Further, at some point, who's going to need the organic body? Maybe a robotic body could be built. And Miguel could regain the use of his arms and legs and walk around again and go back to exercise and painting like he used to do. Why not? There's already robotic hands and robotic legs and so forth. So that's what I'm saying. Science and religion need to talk, and we promote and we encourage and we applaud good science. Regenerative medicine, yes. But don't experiment with human embryos because they can't consent. Right? See what I'm saying? Those are the challenges and the opportunities, like they say in the business world. Okay, let's get back to little basics here. Again, the definition of a species, we're going to go with the biological definition of species, which has these two components. Two individuals of the same species, two individuals belong to the same species if they can reproduce and produce fertile offspring, right? Fertile offspring. And we need to anchor what is a species, again, based on this biological definition, because we said that population is composed of what? Any number of individuals of the same species, of a single species. Because if you say two or more species, then you've jumped to the next level, which is community. A community, and these are key terms in science that are buzzwords that have a technical meaning, all right? Very specific. So in biology, whenever we talk about a population of penguins or whatever, it implies the same species, meaning that theoretically they could all interbreed. Community is two or more populations of different species. So now we got zebras and what's that other water buffalo within the same geographical region in Africa. We got a population of 200 zebra and a population of 80 water buffaloes, right? Those are two populations of different species. So together, those two form a community. And the 20 alligators that are in the river there waiting for those kids to come drink water, that's a third population. And they are also living in the same geographical region, so that's still the same community. Now you got three species. You got zebra, water buffalo, and alligators who live in the same community. You got herbivores, you got carnivores. You can throw in another carnivore, for example, the lion that is following the water buffalo and the zebra, right? So I got four populations, four different species, and still one community. To top it off, we got herbivores. What are the herbivores? The zebra and the water buffalo, right? Then we got carnivores, which are the lion and the alligators, all right? We need two more to complete an entire food web, right? We need one at the bottom end and one at the top end. What's at the bottom end below or allowing the water buffalo and the zebra to live, to survive? We need the herbivores, we need herbs, we need plants, right? We need the producers. So a grassland nearby, all right? Around the edge of that water hole, there's grass. So now we got the species of grass, that's the fifth population there within the same community. And then after the lion has eaten the zebra and walked away, what's left? The carcass, which then The vultures are going to come down and finish off, right? So you get the scavengers, decomposers. Then at the microscopic level, you get bacteria and fungi and all that, of course. So you see communities become more and more complex, all within the same geographical region. More and more complex communities as you add populations of different species, right? How do we go to ecosystem? I can tell you that communities that live in a particular geographical region also form an ecosystem, but up until now, I have only been mentioning living or non-living things. Zebra, water buffalo, grass, vulture, all living things, right? Those are known as biotic factors, biotic factors. Biotic. But there are also abiotic factors, meaning biotic is a reference to bios, life, but when you already have the A in front of the word, it's a negation, non-biotic factors. What are the non-living factors of that community, of that which will make it an ecosystem?
Water.
Exactly, the water, and that's for the alligator. What do the plants need? The soil. And what do all of the animals and the plants also need there? The air, oxygen, CO2, the light, the humidity, temperature. All those are non-living, but they are factors. They exist physically, geographically, and they define the ecosystem. So when you add the abiotic factors to a community, you have what is called an ecosystem. Right? And there are dozens of ecosystems throughout the world, maybe hundreds. It's within a particular geographical region, including the climate of that region, even down to what is known as the microclimate. And finally, we can expand out from ecosystems and look at large geographical areas, like whole continents or swaths of continents. And we get into what is known as biomes. And there are about half a dozen biomes in the whole world, all the way from the tropical, the temperate, to the Arctic regions. About half a dozen biomes. And we'll get more into detail of these in the ecological course in the summer, okay? But you see, it's a combination of we're trying to look at reality by layers of complexity. Because we can talk about the lion and the wolf and the vulture, but they don't exist in thin air, you know, in a vacuum. They're always within a context of a living, dynamic interaction and relationship between populations and among populations, okay? So all of the 6 biomes together for the whole world, then we call that the biosphere. And that's the largest. And so far, looking around the entire universe, what little exploration we humans have been able to do, this is the only planet that has organic life as we know it, okay? Imagine, there are millions of, well, let's start small. Let's say that there are dozens of planets circulating in planetary systems or in solar systems like our own. Then there are, we can jump up several magnitudes. We can say there are millions, if not billions of stars that make up a galaxy, like the Milky Way for us. And then there are millions of galaxies that make up the universe, all right, if not billions or trillions. So the possibilities of planets out there in the universe is exorbitant. It's a huge number of possibility of planets. As far as we know, so far, the only one with life is us, organic life as we know it. Mm-hmm. And all within what we call the biosphere, which is really a very thin layer on the crust of the Earth, of the planet. And keeping that alive is another thin layer of what we call the atmosphere, specifically the troposphere of the atmosphere, which is the one that contains actually the gases oxygen and CO2 for life on Earth. Okay? So biosphere is the big picture. To recap, population then is two or more individuals of the same species living within a particular region. Okay, let's look at some of the people who were doing the modern synthesis. Your textbook, Meyer, I mentioned, spanned it, a century, a very exciting century, the 20th century, right? It's where the evolutionary synthesis occur. It took about 20 years or 30 or more, actually, almost half a century, to come to what is known as this modern synthesis, because Mendel and Darwin were contemporaries, but in different parts of the world. So they really didn't know about each other. It's kind of ironic, because then Gregor Mendel is known as the father of genetics, right? And he was literally a father. He was an Augustinian monk. That's not Mendel. And just like the Augustinians that were running this university, Augustinian friars, some funny, they're all paintings, but there was one photograph of the Augustinian groups where he lived. He lived in a town called Brno, which is part of I believe, the Czech Republic today, Eastern Europe. And there he's doing his famous pea experiments with a pencil brush, taking pollen from one flower and pollinating another flower of the pea. Oh, this one is funny. That's an actual photograph from way back. Sorry. I always click on the wrong thing. Which one is Mendel there?
I'm holding the
Second one.
This guy holding the little plant, okay? He's the only one that's focused on something. But those are his confreres back then. This is probably the prior with the pectoral cross. And so his father was a mathematician, and he was a mathematician too. And he came up with the discovery of inheritance through a factor. He called it the inheritance factor. Later on, we call it genetics and DNA and chromosomes and all that, but he called it the inheritance factor. And he wrote an article, he wrote a little paper where he published his famous ratios, like 3:1 and so forth, of the dominant and recessive ratios, the ones that are so famous today, and it's known as classical genetics, Mendelian genetics, right? But it turns out, you can see from the dates that they're pretty much contemporary, him and Darwin. Charles Darwin was, of course, in Great Britain, and he was a layman, but when he was young, he was also considering the clergy, going into the seminary. Many of Darwin's professors were clergymen, were priests. Of course, they were Anglican priests, because this is in Great Britain, but it was fashionable back then for clergy to study and to study the sciences. Many of them were geologists, or geography was the big science, and geology also was the big science back then in the 1800s, okay? So as a young lad, Darwin considered becoming a clergy himself. But then one of his uncles convinced him to go on a famous voyage on a ship, the Beagle, like the dog, and this trip ended up being, he signed up as a help, as a deckhand, and it ended up taking about 5 years. That trip went around the world and was doing some originally geological and geographical measurements, which was the big science back then. And that's what got him thinking about evolution by means of natural selection and all that, his theory. But a couple of anecdotes. One is that Mendel wrote this little article where he publishes his ratios, his famous genetic ratios of the P's, dominant and recessive, right? And he published it in some obscure mathematical journal of the time. And the cousin of Darwin got a hold of that article, Francis Galton. Galton was a physicist and showed the paper to Darwin. And the anecdote goes that Darwin rejected the paper because he didn't understand the math. Okay? We're talking about a simple 3-to-1 ratio. What is that in percentage? 75, 25%, you know, a quarter to 3/4. Darwin did not understand the math on Mendel's seminal paper of genetic inheritance. If he had, Darwin, would have had the whole thing because he would have had evolution and genetics. If you read his book, I don't know if you ever read the book, The Origin of Species. Actually, the full title, I think I have it here, it's a long title. The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, all right? It's totally qualitative. What do I mean by qualitative? There's not a single reference to a single document, to a single paper, article, nothing. It's totally, in that sense, anti-scientific. But he's arguing something that makes so much common sense that he continuously appeals to observation. Just look at nature, just compare these varieties and so forth. And if you read The Origin of Species, it makes a lot of sense, but he doesn't have a single reference in the entire book. And so we call it qualitative, all right? But he was on target. Had he understood the simple math of a ratio, or a 3-to-1 ratio from Mendel, which his cousin Galton gave him the article, Darwin would have had the whole synthesis 50 years prior. Because we're talking the 18th, actually he published it, I think it was 58, all right? And he only published, he was so scared about publishing his Origin of Species because he knew he was going against the prevailing mentality of the time that God was the creator. And that evolution couldn't be, that the standard at the time was that the species were all created individually by God as they are. It didn't allow it, it was fixed, static, solid, like crystallized. There was no conception of evolution. But it was also a fundamentalistic interpretation of the Bible, which is what I'm going to talk about in greater depth in the second half of the course. It was a fundamentalistic, literal interpretation of the Bible, which we as Catholics would take exception to that, okay? At any rate, the other anecdote is this. Ever heard the name of Alfred Wallace? No relation. Okay, Alfred Wallace was another scientist, and he was in Australia, and he admired Darwin. And Wallace in Australia was working, guess what? On a theory of evolution. And he wrote an article and he sent it to his admirer, Darwin, for Darwin to review. And essentially in that article, Wallace was describing the theory of evolution by means of natural selection, which is what Darwin had been working on for years. And so Darwin said, if I don't publish, I'm dead because Wallace will have it. It's on target. Okay. I don't know if Darwin ever returned the paper to Wallace or gave him any suggestion on it. I don't know. There were no institutional review boards back then. There was no ethics committees or anything like that. All right. But it turns out that Darwin then, in haste, wrote his book, and I think it was 58, and published it, finally got it out there, for which he was ridiculed for the rest of his life as looking as a monkey and so forth, because it went against the, right, these are the caricatures of the time that they were that the press and everybody else was doing, but he was on target mostly. Some aspects of Darwin's theory have been found false, okay? But basically, natural selection by means of the theory of evolution or descent of the species by means of natural selection is on target, okay? One aspect that Darwin didn't know how to deal with, and therefore he didn't talk about it, was sexual selection, which is not, natural selection implies random mating, okay? But typically mating is not random, it's very selective. It has a lot to do with hormones and cycles and choosing, and sometimes the female chooses, sometimes the male chooses, sometimes both choose, like in humans, but typically out there, there's no random mating. It's choice mating, right? And that's sexual selection, because natural selection implies random mating. So from that perspective, natural selection is not that realistic. But Darwin didn't know how to deal with sexual selection. He didn't have an organic explanation for it. Anyway, it took about half a century for these people, mostly Fisher, to do the synthesis between what is known as the modern synthesis, between Darwin and Mendel. Because you see, Mendel provides the biochemical mechanism for evolution to occur, precisely at the level of mutation and recombination, and the genetic code, the inheritance factor, okay? So genetics provides the biochemical mechanism for evolution to occur, okay? And that is known as the modern synthesis. In summary, it was started with Fisher and then Haldane and Wright also, but also Mayer was involved in that, okay? And that's why I consider this little book a classic, and that's why I'm using it as a textbook for here. And while I'm on this, you're going to read chapters 1 and 2. I'm going to ask you a summary. So let's look at just the table of contents for a moment inside. It has 4 parts, but actually the fourth one is about the human, and the first 3 parts is about explaining the process of evolution, okay? And so read chapters 1 and 2. In fact, read the first part, 1, 2, and 3. And you can begin working on those summaries. Let's say a summary per week. So for this Wednesday, if you would please give me a summary of chapter 1 there. Okay. You can see it's about 10 pages more or less.
You just want in part 1, you just want chapter.
Chapter 1 for now, yeah. Read all 3 chapters, but the summary for this Wednesday by midnight, just chapter 1. Okay, so you pace yourself. Also because I want to give you a chance to read a little bit more into it before I present it in the lecture. So that's basically the modern synthesis. Bottom line is bringing together Darwinian evolution with Mendelian genetics and having the key of interpretation for organic life on Earth today, right? Those 2 models are sufficient for explaining the variety of species that we have today. So, speaking of species, let's go to the scientific notation for a moment, scientific classification.
Please repeat that again for me.
Yes, so
modern synthesis.
between Darwinian evolution and Mendelian genetics, we have the mechanism necessary for explaining the living species that we see today. These 2 million that I've been talking about. We have the actual physical, physiological mechanisms for explaining how these species have come about. Sure. So let's look at this classification then. I listed it here very succinctly. Domains are made up of kingdoms. Kingdoms are made up of phyla. One phylum, several phyla. Another thing you'll do in this program is you'll learn a little bit of Latin as we go along. But one phylum, several phyla. Then a phylum is made up of classes. Classes is made up of order. Order is made up of families, family of genus, genera, one genus, several genera. And a genus is made up of one or more species, okay? And in the Linnaean classification, which goes back to Carolus Linnaeus in the 18th century, 1700s, the species also contains the genus name. So the genus is a single word, but the species is two words. It contains the genus and the species, okay? So it's like, for example, Alfred. Actually, the genus for me would be like, say Cioffi, but the species would be Cioffi Alfred, containing the genus also. Here's an example of the black bear, the American black bear, which scientifically is called Ursus americanus. Not very creative. It's American bear, okay, which happens to be black. And there's a brown variety of, talk about variety, there's a brown variety of the American black bear, which is not brown, it's not black, it's brown, but it's a black bear. It's a variety, okay?
Of the same species.
Of the same species.
So it's like another
Variety.
breed, if you will.
Yes, that's right. So in principle, a black bear and a brown black bear can interbreed. Okay, it's a variety. It's like horses. Some horses are blonde, some horses are black, but they're all horses. Okay. Okay, so Ursus americanus is, what is the genus name of Ursus americanus? What is the genus? Ursus, exactly. And what is the species name?
Americanus.
Ursus americanus.
Right.
Okay?
It's a full name.
Exactly. Or if you want to be lazy, you americanus. You dot americanus. Okay? Okay, so that's the little glitch there, all right? Just a little clincher that the species includes the genus, all right? Because americanus, I mean, there are many americanus. So, as I've mentioned, to date, about 2 million species have been discovered on Earth. And it's estimated that only represents between 5 and 10% of the species that exist on Earth. So let's keep it simple. If it were 10%, how many species are estimated to exist on Earth today? If 2% is 10% of, if 2 million is 10% of what?
20
million. The businessman here. Okay, so it's estimated that today there are living on Earth right now, under our noses, 20 million. That's on the low side, if this is 10%. If this is only 5%, then that 20% doubles, right? To 40 million. So estimated, anywhere between 20 to 40 million species live today, the vast majority of which we have not really discovered yet. It's safe to assume that the vast majority of those species are two things: microscopic and living in the deep ocean, right? But they're species. Okay, so these are the ones that we know of that have been classified. And of course, if we go at the genus level of the Ursus, well, there are several Ursura, right? Ursi, and there's a grizzly, and there's a polar, and there's a black bear. And each one of these also has their own varieties. But this is at the genus level. How many species are represented here? 3 species. Excellent. Then we move at the level of the family. We get into other Ursidae that are not strictly Ursus, okay, like the panda and I don't know what this is, but it's another type of bear-like. What's another type of bear-like, which I think is at the level of family, that is local? In fact, we have a family that lives in the forest here. And they're around, and they're rascals, and they get into the garbage.
Raccoon.
Raccoon is from the Ursidae family. Yeah? They're not bears, but they're Ursidae. Okay? Then up higher, so you see it's getting broader and broader classification, right? Several families make up an order. The order, now we're at carnivores. So we've gone beyond just bears. Now we have to put also tigers, foxes, wolves, any other carnivore that's still a mammal, four-legged thing, right? Okay, so that's at the level of order. See, it gets broader. Go further up into the class. See, because class is just below phylum. Class has now will be mammals. Carnivores and non-carnivores, like herbivores, okay? Actually, the dolphin technically is a piscivore because it eats fish, but fish is meat, so is a dolphin a carnivore?
Yes.
Yeah, dolphin is a carnivore, okay? But zebras are normally not carnivores, but they are mammals, so that's at the level of class. Phylum, now this is a large group, so large that it's estimated in only about 3 dozen phyla, depending on who you read. It can be as small as 2 to 3 dozen phyla, depending on which taxonomist you abide by, how the classification is done. Okay, between 2 and 3 dozen phyla. That is going to include also frogs, birds, reptiles, fish, amphibians. What are all these animals? Are they animals? Yes, they're all animals, right? So they're all consumers. What do they share in common? The one structure that is internal that gives them rigidity and flexibility in the body. Exactly. That they have a cord. The spinal cords, they're chordates. Whether it's segmented or not, it's a different story. All of the animals that are listed here happen to have a segmented spinal cord, and therefore they're not only chordates, they're also vertebrates. Segmented, they're segmented into vertebrae, into sections, okay? But vertebrate, interesting, is a subphylum. It's not an actual phylum. It's a subphylum. Moving up higher to the kingdom of the animals, Animalia. Now, it's showing only about 6 kingdoms here. There are 3 more common and 3 less common. If I can get it all in one slide. Okay, so 6 kingdoms, right? This one represented here is Animalia, animals, including this little thing down here that looks like little tubes, and I tell you, they're in the ocean. What are these?
Corals.
Well, they're even more primitive than corals. Sponges. Even though they look like plants, they're not plants, and corals may also look like plants, but they're not plants, they're animals. They're actually, it's a colony of animals, okay? So they're definitely animals, and sponges are also animals. Don't move around much, especially in the adult stage, but the juvenile stage, the larva definitely swims around as part of the plankton. So even sponges are coral, the most primitive ones that we know of, are animals. Okay, so that's at the level of kingdom, and keep in mind the 6, because we're going to look at what those 6 are. You can tell me at least one more kingdom that is not animal. Exactly, plant. And another one?
Bacteria.
Yeah, okay, well, that's at the level, that's at the level of domain, but how about it's a saprophyte, it's a decomposer, it's very important that they're around because they break down things that are decaying. Fungi, the fungi, okay, so that's 3 of the 6. Eventually we get to the highest category, to the largest, broadest category, which is domain. And like I pointed out here, there are 3 domains, okay? So these 6 kingdoms are going to be distributed within these 3 domains. Let's see what those are. Because domains, these 3 domains include all the living things on Earth. Well, this one, which is a little awkward here because it's horizontal, but putting it, I mean, it's vertical, but putting it horizontal doesn't even help that much. You can flip your page around. This is the modern tree of life. And you can see the 3, what are the 3 domains? The 3 big names out here, the 3 big circles or ovals, eukaryotes, bacteria, and archaea. Eukaryotes, bacteria, and archaea. I can tell you that one big difference between the eukaryotes and the bacteria and the archaea is whether their cells have an organized nucleus or not. So that's the key, whether the cells have an organized nucleus or not. Eukaryotes, karyot, now we're going to Greek instead of Latin. Karyos in Greek is nucleus, and eu means true or real. So of these 3 domains, which have true or real nuclei? The eukaryotes, okay, because that's what it means. Eukaryotes, in Greek, it means true or real nucleus. In other words, that the nucleus of the cell is actually organized with a membrane and it contains the DNA within. Whereas bacteria and archaea do not have an organized nucleus. And therefore, they're going to be called prokaryotes. So the prefix pro instead of eu means that before the nucleus is organized, before. All right, but then we need to find a further distinction between bacteria and archaea because you see that they have their own domain. And basically, the distinction between the bacteria and the archaea, they're very similar, except that the archaea are much more primitive than the bacteria. And that's why they call archaea, because they're archaic. If anyone tells you you're archaic, they're telling you you're ancient, you're primitive, you're very old. Okay? I've been told that a couple of times. So here's a simpler way. By the way, for example, in this current complex modern way of classifying all living things, can you find, let's say, Animalia, one of the 6 kingdoms? Look around, it's going to be in the prokaryotes or the eukaryotes? Eukaryotes. You can look around in here in the eukaryotes. How about this one here, animals? Look at fungi. Animals, okay. Plantae should be in here somewhere. It's a question of hunting around. These are algae. Here are plants. So this is a classification according to the phylogenetics, precisely according to the percentage homology, the percentage of DNA. So for example, animals and quanoflagellates over here have very similar DNA, more similar DNA than animals and plants, because you see the branching occurs first between animal and plants than between animals and quanoflagellates. Quanoflagellates are microscopic single-cell organisms that live in a liquid environment, all right, typically in ponds or sometimes in seawater. But you see how the mapping works? We are closer to the fungi than we are to the plants, because the branching with plants occurs before the branching with fungi. So this is basically a phylogenetic tree based on percentage homology, percentage compatibility of the DNA of the genome of all these different groups. All right? Now you notice significant, here's a root that has a question mark, will remain a question mark forever because we don't have direct access to that root. All of these groups, all of these organisms can be sequenced and look at percentage homology because they exist today. But the root, by definition, is an ancestor and therefore doesn't exist today. So we can only speculate because everything in the tree is pointing to a common ancestor. Otherwise, we can ask the question, how come is it that of these three huge domains, the eukaryotes, the bacteria, and the archaea, they all have DNA as the universal common inheritance factor? How can that be if they did not derive from a single organism who also had DNA as its inheritance factor, as its genetic code? See, so it's by inference. It's all we can do. But the evidence is overwhelming. All right. Here's a simpler classification where it shows the 6 kingdoms. Actually, 5 you can see here, but Archaea is the one that is kind of a little obscure. But at least these 5 we can talk about. Certainly the animals, we're very familiar with all kinds of animals, and the one big common characteristic of all animals is that they typically move at some stage in their life. They're motile, okay? In contrast to plants, which typically generally don't move unless we're talking about pollen or something like that, or the seed. Another big characteristic distinction between these 2 kingdoms is that plants are producers, specifically of glucose, of sugar, through the process of photosynthesis, in contrast with animals who do not produce glucose. We do not photosynthesize normally, right? But we do consume producers, or another animal that consumes producers. Then there's a 3rd kingdom of the fungi, which I've mentioned several times, and they are producers. Do fungi photosynthesize? No, they don't. Even if they look a little greenish, some fungi may actually look a little greenish, but they do not photosynthesize, okay? So if they don't photosynthesize, they don't make glucose, and therefore they're not producers. If they're not producers, then they have to be consumers. But they're a very special kind of consumer. What do they consume? They consume detritus. They consume decaying organisms, either decaying plants or decaying animals. So they're also known as saprophytes. Saprophytes. Okay? Sapro is dead. They feed or they love dead, decaying. It's a good thing they do, because otherwise we would be buried in carcasses and decaying, rotting plants and animals, mostly plants, several kilometers high, and it would be no way of living that way. So thank God for the fungi who decompose all that decaying material. And they're necessary but not sufficient, because there's a lot of biomass out there that dies on a regular basis. So bacteria finish it off, okay? Bacteria. Here we have this kingdom of monerans, the monerans, which are actually subdivided into bacteria or archaea, which are the more primitive ones. Then there is a grab bag group, most of which are unicellular, but not all, because algae, for example, are multicellular. Some of which are consumers, like the amoeba and the paramecium, but some are producers, like the algae, and some are both producers and consumers. In other words, they move around, but they also photosynthesize, like the euglena, which is also microscopic. So this is a grab bag for lack of making 20 other kingdoms to fit these guys in, but they have little phylogenetic similarity, all right? They're not really on the phylogenetic tree, they're all over the place. That's why this is a very simplistic classification. The more realistic one is this one, all right? At any rate, they're called protists. And here is kind of a breakdown of matching up the 3 domains. Archaea remain as in their own kingdom. Bacteria also include a group called cyanobacteria, which used to be classified. When I studied biology in the 1970s at FAU, These were called cyanophytes, which were classified as algae because they do photosynthesize. And thank God they did, but now they classified as bacteria because they are true bacteria. They have a bacterial wall and not an algae wall, their cells. And you know what these guys did back about 3.5 billion years ago? They generated the bulk of the oxygen that we breathe on Earth today. If it hadn't been for these, imagine the multi-million, trillion, quadrillion, multi-trillion bacteria needed, cyanobacteria needed to generate the bulk of the oxygen that exists on Earth today. Now these guys, because the primitive atmosphere, we know, again, from inference and from the volcanic activity and so forth, that it was mostly methane, which is very toxic for us and many other species, okay? But at some point, these cyanobacteria evolved out of the archaea and were able to photosynthesize and started photosynthesizing and turning CO2 into oxygen and water, okay, and glucose. And so there is now projects called terraforming. You ever heard of terraforming? For example, terraforming Mars. What would happen if we send some cyanobacteria into Mars, unmanned, a spaceship, with vials of cyanobacteria, and we terraform Mars? We created an oxygen-like atmosphere in Mars. We actually start an evolutionary process over there. It may take a few million years, but we have the capacity today to do that. Should we do it? Who has the right to terraform another planet? A committee? A country? Whoever has the rocket? Of course, you need the rocket first. See, and there are international treaties, and there are meteors out there that have, you heard of rare earth metals, rare earth minerals, or soil, crystals, minerals that are very scarce, let's say scarce or scarce, right? Around the world. Guess who has most of the rare earth mines on Earth? China. And the rare earth are needed for making the microchips. For now, until we start growing crystals, the microchip rare earths are needed. And so they're extremely expensive because there are not too many of them around. And I'll give you a few little ones for a few $1 million. And China has the bulk of them. So that's a big corner of the market, right? Mm-hmm. Of technology. But they have discovered some meteorite out there. There is a huge meteorite that is full of rare earth metals. And there's now a project in NASA trying to land a robot machine factory to start mining that and sending rare earth over here, okay, to not just planet Earth, but the United States planet Earth. And that would tilt the market tremendously. Who has the right? Whoever gets there first? What if I develop a rocket that also has a machine gun that shoots on the other rocket that is trying to get there first? I shoot it down, then I get there. Yes, no, maybe. I mean, so if past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior, typically when the situation gets hot, we fight it out. Look at the colonization of the world. Culture after culture after culture. We kind of fight it out. So at the end of the day, it comes down to sheer strength, sheer power, whoever has the power. So it's a bioethical issue, right? But at the same time, who's willing to listen? These are the challenges, but these are projects that exist in parts of the world today. Okay, so for the other 4, they fall into the eukarya because they have organized nuclei, whereas these are prokarya, the archaea and the bacteria, because they don't have an organized nucleus. And they're also known as the monera. Okay. Just one more thing. This is again an overview. We'll go into more detail about it, but I wanted you to be clear about classification, scientific classification. the grouping of all species into populations, into communities, into ecosystems, into biomes, into the biosphere. And then the final thing here, I just put it out. I'm not going to go into detail because the rest of the course will be going into this. The evidence for evolution, all right? In other words, we cannot go around the world with blinders. Some people choose to deny that the sun exists. I can tapar el sol con un dedo. I can blank out the sun with one finger, but I'm only with the thumb, but I'm only blanking it out for myself. Anyone who's away from my thumb will see the sun clearly, all right? So there is evidence, and it's basically these 5 main points that are there looking at us, and we have to acknowledge them, all right? The fossil record, what we call comparative embryology, which points to a common ancestry, and phylogenetics, the percentage homology of DNA that I mentioned, the universal genetic code, and even evolution in the works with bacteria immunity to or resistance to antibiotics. That's evolution occurring in front of our very eyes in very short time, in a period of decades, which typically evolutionary time is measured in millions of years, okay? And it's a big concern in medicine, of course, because more and more bacteria are becoming resistant to antibiotics, and they're known as superbacteria. And these superbacteria, you know where they tend to lodge? In hospitals. Where in the hospital? In the AC system of the hospital. Pretty challenging, right? So the filters of the hospital, the AC system, it's more and more complex every time. And that's why within 24 hours of having heart surgery, they want you out of the hospital. Okay? It's getting drastic, but we're seeing evolution happening right now, okay? And then finally, there's such a thing as micro and macro evolution. One leads to speciation, the other one doesn't. But we'll get into that further into the course, all right? I think you've been patient enough and enduring enough for today. Questions, comments? It's kind of an overview. What we're going to do is we're going to get more in detail into this stuff so that you have competency in it, and you can talk about the fossil record competently. You can talk about percentage homology and so forth. I'm probably forgetting stuff because I usually forget to say this or that, but next time, if you cannot come to class, make sure you send me an email beforehand so I can send you the link, just like I'm doing now, all right? I generate a link as a URL, which I email you, then you click into that URL and you will be connected to what we're seeing on the screen. Can you think of anything that I'm forgetting?
Do you want us to do chapter 2 and 3 because we have like next week and then the gap?
Yes, basically a chapter a week if you can work on that. And so that's one little summary. And the other summary, at least for now, until I match up, because at some point I'm going to start actually talking on the chapters of the book. And that will be a single summary, okay? But if you can give me a summary of the lecture also.
Oh, the lecture as well.
Of this lecture, yes. Okay, which again, you can use the diagram that I gave you. Oh, I'll forward you this. So the handouts that you have, I'll forward it by email also, electronically. So you have it and you can just edit from there and fill in a little bit. So you can use that as a summary. See what I'm saying? Just retool it and flesh it out a little bit. Take out the big diagrams and stuff like that take a lot of room. And you can use that as your shell for the summary. Okay? Basically, I just want to know that you're getting it. Let me know that you're getting it, and then I'll give you feedback on that by next time we meet.
So you want a summary of this lecture? And
Yes.
a summary
Of chapter 1 of Maya.
Chapter 1 of this.
On
Yes.
Wednesday.
Hopefully by this Wednesday. If for some reason you can't, let me know and extend it. At least do one of those 2 summaries by this Wednesday. Okay.
How do we send this?
Through email.
To the email?
Yes, if you don't have an STU email yet, just use your own email, all right? But as an attachment, it will be an attachment to the email, to my email, all right? You all have that in the top part and the first page of the syllabus is my email address. Okay, what else? Oh, yes, please, very important. I also put some of these in your front cover, inside front cover, all right? So please, let's see if we can get more students in here. I'm thinking that if you have family, friends, colleagues, anyone who you think might be interested, give me one of the flyers, and I'll be happy to talk to them, give me a call, send me an email or something, and I can give them more detail like I've done with you, all right? And I figured that even because we won't have class now for 2 more weekends, or 2 more weeks, we can even take students up to maybe 3 weeks from now, because they will just have to catch up on this one lecture, which is going to be available online, and then they would come into the second lecture, okay? So there's still time, I think, for signing up to this course within the next couple of weeks. And it's just a richness for the class. So if you know of anyone else who may be interested in this, pass it on. Yes, please.
Bio 514, what's the name?
Oh, yes. It's that whole long thing, responsible research and professional conduct. Yeah, it's on the back. It gives you actually the title of each course.
Term 2 or A7.
Oh, yes, A7, right. It's in A7. When you go into the calendar there, into the registration, you have to look for A7. This one is on A6. Those are the 2 9-week things that I talk about. So register in it, and then don't worry about the calendar anymore.
And so then for chapter 2 and 3, would you want them the following weeks?
Yes.
Okay.
On average, 1 per week.
1 per week.
All right, so you can pace yourself. But at some point, our start the lecture will actually be on the chapters. Okay, so there will be a single summary. Okay, I think I have everything said. Well, if something comes to mind, I'll send you an email. I need to send you the handouts electronically. Remember to log into that Bio 514, the module, the Ethics Center, and generate your own account there, okay? All right, well, thank you once again for being here. Look forward to this new cohort and this semester. Anytime, if you need to get in touch with me, use whatever means we have available. All right. Thank you for coming. Feel free to bring whatever you want, snacks or anything. Typically, we'll go for about an hour and a half, then break and do the second half. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording now.